The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the organic wine company, ecowine.com.
Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242
or visit tomsbeets.com. It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Travis Lupik's book, Fighting for Space, how a group of drug users transformed one city's struggle with addiction. This is from the introduction. In a beat-up old hotel, Mark Townsend watched one of his tenants, a woman named Mary Jack, crawl up the stairs, so crippled by the symptoms of withdrawal that she couldn't lift her body to walk. It was 1992, Townsend recalls, and doctors required a thorough examination and patient history before they would prescribe methadone to someone addicted to drugs. Often that took several days. How can we make this woman's life bearable, he remembers thinking. The rules were wrong, Townsend decided. He found a doctor who put Mary on methadone immediately. They broke the law. That still didn't solve Mary's addiction to heroin. She would struggle with that for many years, but they addressed her immediate pain and made her well enough to fight another day. Like Townsend, activists, healthcare workers, and some politicians in cities across America are realizing that they will have to break and rewrite the rules on how society addresses addiction. The continent is in the grips of an overdose epidemic. In 2016, there were an estimated 64,000 fatal drug overdoses across the United States, up from fewer than 15,000 20 years earlier. Roughly 75% of 2016 deaths were attributed to heroin and similar drugs like OxyContin and fentanyl. For people under the age of 50, an overdose associated with an opioid is now the #1 cause of death in the United States. Heroin has reached the middle class and suburban America. At the same time, public opinion is turning against the war on drugs. Many policymakers are beginning to look at addiction as a healthcare issue as opposed to one for the criminal justice system. One Canadian city has seen this sort of crisis before. In response, a grassroots group of drug addicts waged a political street fight for 2 decades to transform how Vancouver treats its most marginalized citizens. Beginning in the early 1990s, activists pushed the city to adopt a 4-pillars approach to addiction. Authorities would continue with the pillars of prevention, treatment, and enforcement, but also deploy a series of complementary programs described as harm reduction. The city defined it like this: the principles of harm reduction require that we do no harm to those suffering from substance addiction, and that we focus on the harm caused by problematic substance use rather than substance use per se. In Vancouver, the municipal government accepted that it could not immediately help every addict stop using drugs. Therefore, for those people who fail to get clean or who are simply not ready for that step, it would attempt to make drug use less harmful. Inherent in harm reduction is an understanding that it is not necessarily the drugs themselves that do the most damage to the users. The law and systems of prohibition, which make drug procurement and possession illegal, are what hurt the people the most. When a person addicted to cocaine injects with a dirty needle, it's not the cocaine that poses a risk of infectious disease, it's the syringe. So why not make a clean needle available? Yes, the risk of overdose remains, as does the much larger issue of addiction itself, but the potential harm of an infectious disease is removed. When someone uses heroin in an alley, hurriedly injecting for fear of police, it's not the drug that causes them to rush and miscalculate their dose, possibly leading to an overdose. It's their fear of persecution. If they were offered an injection site where they could take their time and use under the observation of healthcare professionals, the risks would be reduced. Again, the addiction remains, but if they overdose at an injection site and a nurse is there to monitor them, they live to make another attempt at long-term treatment. Harm reduction strategies are about keeping people alive and as healthy as possible. excuse me, until they can arrive at a place in their lives where treatment or abstinence works for them. Today, there are dozens of cities across North America at the point where Vancouver was in the 1990s. Toledo, Miami, and San Francisco, for example, have sprouted activist groups that are working with healthcare professionals to slowly warm public opinion to this issue. 90% of new heroin users are white. A rising number are middle class or wealthy, a U.S. official told Frontline on PBS in 2016. Quote, "It's been true throughout American history that when drugs penetrated into the middle class, the white middle class, politicians panic much more than they do when the drugs are concentrated in poor neighborhoods. It's not fair and it's not right, but that is the kind of country we are living in." Jurisdictions across the United States are looking to Vancouver's example with increasing interest. One of the founders of Vancouver's harm reduction movement, Mark Townsend, spent April 2016 in New York helping that city expand needle exchange programs. In October 2016, a delegation from Seattle visited North America's excuse me, visited North America's first supervised injection facility, Insight, in Vancouver. In early 2017, former BC coroner and Mayor Larry Campbell was in Sacramento helping lawmakers draft notices that would allow for the establishment of supervised injection facilities in California. Interest in Vancouver's model has grown with the increasing severity of America's opioid problem. This book, Fighting for Space, is about people who have slipped through the cracks. It's about those who have suffered the consequences of addiction and prohibition and who did not have family or friends to help them get back up. It's about those who, for a myriad of reasons, failed with treatment and rehabilitation. It tells their stories and explains harm reduction for communities that are struggling with overflowing jails, crimes fueled by desperation, and people left to die in the streets.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Greetings, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. Thom Hartmann here with you, the home of the political revolution. Indeed. I get email, right? This is from Donald J. Trump. Dear Fred Flintstone, the Justice Department is suing, in all caps, suing the state of California for violating the Constitution by passing laws that shield illegal immigrants. President Trump is now facing extreme backlash from Democrats and the fake news, extreme in all caps. Add your name to show you support the Department of Justice's lawsuit against sanctuary state California. Democrats remain defiant in their insubordination to federal law. I thought Republicans were in favor of states' rights. Apparently not. And they have the entire fake news media machine parroting their talking points. The mayor of Oakland, California went so far, this is all in italics, the mayor of Oakland, California went so far as to publicly tip off illegal immigrants when ICE was about to begin its arrests of known criminals. Americans across the country now see that the Democrats have officially become the party of obstruction, lawlessness, government shutdowns, and of putting illegal immigrants before American citizens. The president is calling on you to stand by him in the face of such flagrant lawlessness by the Democrats. Add your name to show you support the Department of Justice's lawsuit against sanctuary state California. Thank you, Team Trump. Sign your name here. Of course, when you click there to sign your name, they ask you for money. Of course, they're using, this is the Trump campaign fund, which is being used. All these, nice little sweet Trumpats all across the country are sending them $5 or $10, and they're using that money to pay the legal bills for Don Jr., lying about the Trump Tower meeting. It's incredible. Shadow banking assets have now grown to more than $45 trillion. By the way, it's Anything Goes Friday. Whatever's on your mind, give us a shout. The phone number, 202-808-9925. And, we can talk about anything from is Donald Trump really a lizard person, to have the UFOs taken over North Korea, whatever. I mean, it's, by the way, on the Stormy Daniels story, I think the media is just starting to figure out what the real story is here. And this was the rationale that Republicans used to impeach Bill Clinton. And the argument that they made was that if Bill Clinton was willing to lie about his relationship with Monica Lewinsky, that meant he had something he was trying to hide. He was trying to cover it up. if a politician, particularly if the politician is as powerful as President of the United States, if a politician has something to hide, that politician is vulnerable to blackmail. And apparently Stormy Daniels isn't the only one. And so, you know, the question, how many of these non-disclosure agreements or hush money agreements or whatever you want to call them has Donald Trump entered into with women with whom he has had sex or who have alleged that he has abused them in some way? And to what extent is he vulnerable to blackmail? You know, if he wants to do away with the possibility of blackmail, he should just have his lawyer, Mr. Cohen, Michael Cohen, just come out and say it. Anyway, back to shadow banking assets. Shadow banking grew by nearly 8% globally over the past year. Shadow banking is banking that is not essentially regulated. And it's problematic. $45 trillion. Keep in mind the GDP of the entire planet is around $55 trillion. Or at least it was a few years ago. I haven't probably updated my numbers recently. The wider banking ecosystem accounts for $160 trillion in assets worldwide. But this from the Financial Times, piece by Carolyn Bingham in London. Shadow banking grows to more than $45 trillion in assets globally. There's, you know, I said it's Anything Goes Friday. We can talk about weird stuff. People are constantly going, oh, it's the Bilderbergers. Oh, it's the Illuminati. Oh, it's the Masons. You know, there's secret societies ruling the world. No, there's these bankers. And many of them, you know, I mean, you know, many of them are like big corporations that are running their own banking operations since Glass-Steagall was blown up. So we have that. Alternet published the second part of my Walking Your Blues Away book today, an excerpt from it. It lays out the specific technique to deal with trauma, PTSD in large part, and other kinds of trauma. And you can check that out over at alternet.org. I also submitted to them last night a piece on trade, and I'm not sure if or when they're going to publish it, but basically the message of it was, you know, even a broken clock is right twice a day. Donald Trump is actually right on trade. He's not doing it right, but it's a start. And the progressive Democrats never joined with Bill Clinton in 1992 and said, yes, we need free trade. Progressive Democrats have always said that a certain amount of protectionism is necessary to keep particularly manufacturing jobs, good manufacturing jobs here in the United States. And progressive Democrats are still saying that and have been saying it for years. Bernie Sanders campaigned on it. And somehow there's this total media amnesia about it as all these talking heads on MSNBC and CNN in particular are parodying the neoliberal Bill Clinton line that, hey, it's, you know, it should be a global economy. Well, that's fine if you're a developing country. Keep in mind, you know, when Reagan started this process, China, in 1986, I spent a month in November of 1986 living in Beijing, living at the International Acupuncture Teaching Hospital, taking courses every day, you know, for that period of time on acupuncture. I was curious, you know, and in the morning we would study meridians and qi and points and herbs. And then in the afternoon, we'd go out in the wards and stick pins in people, stick needles in people. It was fascinating. And at that time, there were no skyscrapers in Beijing. There, you know, just a year or two earlier than that, Louise and I had been to Shenzhen, which was this little town, this little sleepy town of a couple thousand people in what they referred to then as the New Territories, which was about a 4-hour train ride, as I recall, or maybe bus ride from Hong Kong. And they were going to experiment with capitalism there. This was in the early 80s. But China was a profoundly poor country. When I was in Beijing, there were big piles of briquettes of coal in the streets that people would use to take into their homes. The city had this constant gray haze. There were no skyscrapers. The buildings were old. The tallest building in town was either the Hilton or the Hyatt. I forget which one, but it was an American hotel chain that had 10 or 12 stories. They had a steakhouse at the top and a pizza place. And that was it. I ate lunch every day for less than a penny. And China went from that to, like, complete industrialization. I mean, really putting things together. And China went from that to what we have today, this full industrialization, this major modernization, by protecting their domestic markets, not by participating in free trade, but by exploiting the fact that Reagan and then Bush and then Clinton and then Bush and then Obama and had all just promoted so-called free trade. And what it did was, all these companies in America ship their manufacturing over to China. And now you walk into a Macy's or into a Target or into a Walmart or any other kind of store looking for anything made in the United States, and you pretty much can't find it. So anyhow, what I'm saying in this alternate piece, if or when they publish it, I'm assuming that they will, and it'll probably be this weekend. And by the way, this weekend I'll be in Minneapolis. I'm flying out there as soon as I get off the air today for the Blue State Ball, KTNF's Blue State Ball. You can check it out on their website. But anyhow, what I'm saying is that the Democrats need to steal this issue from between Donald Trump's teeth and run with it. Say, yes, we're in favor of fair trade instead of free trade. And Donald Trump isn't doing it good enough, and he's not doing it fast enough, and we can do it better. That's what the Democrats should be doing. We'll be back with your calls on Anything Goes Friday.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Anything Goes Friday here on the Thom Hartmann Program, the True People's Media. Back with your calls in just a second. And welcome back. Michael in Imperial Beach, California. Hey, Michael, thanks for watching Free Speech TV. What's up?
Hey, Mr. Hartmann. Okay, this is about Putin. After Putin took his major port in Crimea, at least the world, did sanctions and stuff like that. Now he's securing his port in Syria. And with countless reporters and dissidents murdered, with the Republicans and Trump not imposing sanctions, and Putin trying to break up the EU and NATO, if you had to theorize, does he actually think that if he's successful in doing all this, if China votes a leader for life policy, what do you think Putin's plan for China is going to be? And do you think that Putin even thinks that he's mortal? And that there are people out there who really don't agree with him?
Yeah, I think Putin thinks he's mortal. I think that if China, if Xi becomes basically emperor for life, which it looks like he's set to do, I don't see how that is going to necessarily affect Russia at all. It arguably would affect us a whole lot more because they're one of our largest trading partners, and they are soon to become the world's largest economy, which is going to mean that the old saying that the Japanese used to have, when the U.S. Catches a cold, Japan gets pneumonia, is going to flip around. If China catches a cold, we're going to get pneumonia. It'll be a disaster. With regard to Crimea, there was an election in Crimea, as I recall. That is a fairly complex issue. The Russian meddling in Ukraine, you could from the Russian point of view, from the American point of view, we're saying Russia's trying to be expansionist, and Victoria Nuland and others have been very clear about that. Hillary Clinton was a Secretary of State. Obama was. That's our policy. From the Russian point of view, Ukraine was their buffer between their country, between Russia and Western Europe, essentially. And the deal that was made between Gorbachev and Reagan and then George Herbert Walker Bush, the deal that was made to dissolve the Soviet Union was that there would always be buffer countries between Russia, non-NATO buffer countries between Russia and the rest of Europe, because Russia saw NATO as a military, and it is a military alliance, as a potentially militarily hostile alliance. So I can see both sides of this, and I think that there needs to be some kind of a reasonable resolution to these issues that meets the needs of both our countries and of the people in these individual countries. With regard to Syria, Russia has had a deepwater port there, and I believe an Air Force base, for decades. That's a deal that they cut with Assad, just like we have one with Qatar. And right now, the UAE, Mr. Prince's good buddies, and the Saudis are trying to basically take down Qatar. And we've got this giant, I forget which fleet it is, but our major fleet in that region is out of Qatar, and Trump is dithering, and he's been played by the Saudis on this. So I don't see that. I see that as a potential proxy U.S.-Russia fight. But Russia having a port in another country with which they have an agreement to have a port, I don't see how that's different than the United States having a port in another country that has a port. So, Michael, I don't quite see it in the stark terms you do. I think all these things need to be worked out, and I think all these things are potential flashpoints that could provoke World War III. And with a stripped-down State Department and Donald Trump in the White House, we should all be very concerned. Michael, thank you for the call. We'll be back.
I think that putting a wife to work is a very dangerous thing.
Welcome back to Anything Goes Friday. Thom Hartmann here with you. Hello, Dave. Asheville, North Carolina provides the latest example that police brutality remains pervasive in the United States. This is from the Daily Kos piece in Daily Kos by Kelly Mackius, if I'm pronouncing that right. Federal authorities are investigating body camera footage from August that shows two white police officers tasering and beating a black man who they accused of jaywalking. This guy was jaywalking at midnight, right? Jaywalking at midnight? Really? John, I mean, like there's an epidemic of traffic accidents at midnight in Asheville, North Carolina. They have such terrible traffic jams at midnight that they need to enforce the jaywalking laws. Johnny Jermaine Rush was coming home after his dishwashing shift at Cracker Barrel, right? The guy was coming home from work. It was after midnight when he was approached by police officer Verino Ruggiero. Ruggiero told Rush that he had failed to cross the street using the crosswalk multiple times. He then said that he was left with the choice of either arresting Rush or writing him a ticket. When Rush responds with something that equates to the equivalent of "do what you got to do, but leave me alone," that's when the situation became serious. Officer Chris Hickman, who is training Officer Ruggiero and wearing the body camera, orders Mr. Rush to put his hands behind his back. Mr. Rush runs. The officers chase him, tackle him to the ground. During the arrest, Mr. Rush is shocked with a taser, choked, and beaten by Officer Hickman, according to police records. At several points while pinned to the ground, Mr. Rush cried, "I can't breathe." The camera footage also shows Officer Hickman hitting Mr. Rush on the head over and over with a closed fist, and Mr. Rush crying out in pain as he's shocked with a taser. Insane. Asheville, North Carolina. It's a fairly progressive town. Who would have known? Senate banking deregulation, all kinds of stuff going on in the news today, but we'll get to that. Let's start out with your phone calls. Patrick in Nacogdoches, Texas. Am I saying that right, Patrick? Thanks for listening to Sirius XM.
Nacogdoches. Yeah,
Nacogdoches.
close enough.
What's up?
Hey, well, I mean, I listen to your show occasionally, and I'm probably more conservative in most of my views than you could imagine, but I do love our country, and I'm concerned because if you listen to talk radio on either side or even media, and there are sides, they almost sound mutually exclusive to me, and I don't see a place where we reconcile and just be Americans. I'm just concerned that we seem to be painting ourselves into corners on opposite ends, And there's no way that everybody who's progressive is evil and liberal and godless and amoral, and there's no way that everybody who's conservative is, you know, heartless and unfeeling and uncaring. And I just wondered what you thought about that.
I think it's a really important point, Patrick. The part of this is driven by the balkanization via, in part, I would say, social media, of the way that we get our news and the way that we get our information. Part of it is driven by, you know, Fox News really pioneered this. Back in the, and this is going to sound like I'm blaming Republicans, but I think that this is actually history. I wrote about it in my book, Crash of 2016. Back during the Nixon administration, Roger Ailes came to Richard Nixon and proposed to him something called GOP TV, which would be a television network that would exclusively present the Republican point of view, or the corporate point of view is one of the ways that he characterized it to Nixon. Nixon shopped it around, tried to find any big corporations or billionaires of the day who would fund it. Nobody would, and so the idea kind of went on hold until the 1980s, I believe it was, whenever Fox News started. And Roger Ailes found Rupert Murdoch, who had, you know, just become a U.S. citizen and was looking to expand his empire in the United States. And Rupert Murdoch funded Fox News. They lost $500 million a year for the first 5 years. You know, he lost a couple billion dollars, and which is huge. I mean, you consider Air America went down, you know, $13 million in debt. This was, you know, over $1 billion. But he made it work, and he made it work with this formula that Ailes had proposed to Nixon, which was all partisan all the time. We take a side and we push that side. And so now in the last few years, well, I'd say actually since the middle of the Bush administration with the rise of Keith Olbermann, MSNBC has sort of become the alternative voice, although their morning lineup is more kind of centrist and corporate Democratic, or in the case of Morning Joe, middle-of-the-road Republican. And CNN is, it seems like they're trying to walk the line between the two, but, you know, I don't have a solution, Patrick, other than trying to, for all of us to try to vary our media diet. I mean, I'm impressed that you listen from time to time to the progressive channel on Sirius XM. I listen to right-wing talk radio from time to time. You know, I think that we all should expose ourselves to alternative point of views. Your thoughts?
Well, I mean, you know, I have friends that are very liberal, and we actually, you know, we discuss politics occasionally. We argue about it every time.
Sure.
But we're still able to love each other.
Yeah, yeah, and we need more of that modeled in our society and in our culture. It's one of the reasons that I try to get conservatives on this program regularly. Yes, we debate, but you know, Jerry Corsi, you know, what's his name? Our regular conservative that, Julio Rivera, who comes on and debates. You know, it's, you know, and you know, I try to recognize their essential humanity, even if I'm disagreeing with their message. I don't so much hear that coming out of conservative talk radio or on Fox News anymore, you know, since Alan Colmes is dead. But, you know, Patrick, I think that, you know, I appreciate your good spirit. Thank you for the call. Thanks for listening to Sirius XM. We'll be right back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
It's the place where we dare to ask, is Walmart a person? And regardless of what the Supreme Court says, we dare to say, no, don't think so. Not a person. We're reading today from the American Revolution of 1800 by Dan Sisson. He wrote the book 40 years ago. Recently, I went through, Dan and I actually went through, I wrote a foreword and an afterword to it and did some substantial editing on the book. And it's something you need to read. This is from the introduction, which I wrote. It is rare when a book about our early republic is relevant 40 years after it was originally published. It is rarer still when that book provides insight into national problems we refuse to solve 2 centuries later. You are therefore holding in your hands or reading on your pad or computer one of the most important books you will ever encounter. Here is why. Unlike other histories of this era, this book is written from a revolutionary perspective, much like Jefferson's generation viewed the world. The American Revolution of 1800 was not just about an election. It was about the life and death struggle for power between democratic-republican principles and oligarchic plutocratic values based on corruption. In short, this book, by implication, is about the identical crisis America faces today. The author's unique analysis is based on the idea of faction controlling party and how both undermine constitutional government. In an age where modern parties and the factions that control them have paralyzed our government, this book validates the politics of the founders. In still another contribution, the book demonstrates how preserving revolutionary ideas within our culture depends on understanding the classical tradition. The ability to recognize a demagogue is rooted deeply in the role Caesar played in destroying the Republic of ancient Rome. That fear of a Caesar inspired Jefferson and others to organize citizens against the Federalists, thereby completely contradicting the political rules of their time. This book, above all, presents a profoundly positive view of Jefferson and his creativity in the midst of crisis. It celebrates his gift 24 years after he wrote the Declaration of Independence and proves he never abandoned his principles or his revolutionary vision for America's future. Ironically, it's become a cliche in political and economic circles that while we love Thomas Jefferson, we live in a country largely run by Alexander Hamilton's policies and John Adams's politics. This may have been more true of the roughly 200 years before the contemporary free trade era, beginning in the 1970s under Richard Nixon and exploding in the mid-1990s when Bill Clinton signed NAFTA. Alexander Hamilton must be rolling over in his grave. Nevertheless, we have become a mercantilist nation dominated by banks and big industries as Hamilton envisioned. It is true that there were huge differences between Hamilton and Jefferson, particularly in their visions for the future of America and its economy. And those divisions tend to dominate interpretations of our political discussion when we reference the era of our first few presidents. But a much larger and more dramatic battle of worldviews played out in the late 1790s between President John Adams and Vice President Thomas Jefferson, leading directly to what is arguably the most transformational presidential election in the history of the United States, the election of 1800. In other books and places, both Dan Sisson and I have written at some length about the differences between these two men and their respective visions of America. Adams relished throwing newspapers editors in prison and demanded that when he and his wife visited a town, the local militia come out to fire their cannons in salute of him and shout, "God save President Adams." Jefferson was so horrified by Adams's Alien and Sedition Acts that he left town the day they were signed into law, and as president often wore simple homespun garments. He was known to answer the front door of the White House in his bathrobe, and more than one visitor mistook him for a servant. As president, Jefferson literally acted out his egalitarian visions of America. In my book, The Crash of 2016, The Plot to Destroy America and What We Can Do to Stop It, I describe Jefferson's concern over aristocracy in American politics. On October 28, 1813, in a letter to his old rival John Adams, Jefferson commented on his distrust of America's growing wealthy elite, naming in particular the Senate, which was not then democratically elected by the people. Referring to the, quote, cabal in the Senate of the United States, end quote, Jefferson wrote, "You, John Adams, think it best to put the pseudo-aristoi into a separate chamber of legislation, the Senate, where they may be hindered from doing their mischief by their coordinate branches, and where also they may be a protection to wealth against the agrarian and plundering enterprises of the majority of the people." Then Jefferson countered in the letter, writing, "I do not believe them, the Senate, necessary to protect the wealthy, because enough of them will find their way into every branch of the legislation to protect themselves." Instead, Jefferson wrote, "I think the best remedy is exactly that provided by all our constitutions, to leave to the citizens the free election. In general, they will elect the really good and wise. In some instances, wealth may corrupt and birth blind them, but not in sufficient degree to endanger society." And in a final warning about the largely Federalist cabal in the Senate, these would be the conservatives of their time, Jefferson wrote, quote, "The artificial aristocracy is a mischievous ingredient in government, and provision should be made to prevent its ascendancy. I think that to give them power in order to prevent them from doing mischief is arming them for it, and increasing instead of remedying the evil." In a 1786 letter to George Washington, Jefferson gave his most explicit warning about this threat of a military allied with the plutocracy within, and advocated for unwavering vigilance against it. Quote, "Though the day may be at some distance, beyond the reach of our lives perhaps, yet it will certainly come, when a single fiber left of this institution will produce an hereditary aristocracy which will change the form of our governments from the best to the worst in the world. Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Welcome back. 34 minutes past the hour. It's the Thom Hartmann Program, home of the political revolution, the place where sane people get their news. Mike in Lomita, California. Hey, Mike, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Mr. Hartmann, thank you for doing your job. By the way, just an extra thought nugget for everyone. Could one of the next year's Nobel Peace Prize winners be Stormy Daniels? Anyway.
Time will tell.
Yeah, I just wanted to talk about the problem in the southwest United States of illegal immigrants bringing armed violence to people's homes. For instance, the county seat of the place I was born is called El Pueblo de Nuestra Señora la Reina de los Ángeles de Porciúncula, or better known to others as L.A., or as the Puchos say in this area, I did not cross the border crossed me. All of the formerly Mexican U.S. was seized in home invasion robbery by the armies of the United States. In fact, you know, the reason we have community property in California is that was the law under Mexico, and the treaty required that to be carried forward
So
under California law.
You want to put this in the frame of the Polk administration and the Mexican-American War?
I just want to say that it was armed criminality that made this country part of the United States in the first place. It was denounced from the floor of the House of Representatives by Abraham Lincoln.
I was just going to say, Abraham Lincoln hated Polk's War. It was one of his major issues when he was an Illinois state representative.
So to try to paint the honest, hardworking people who are just struggling to make our economy thrive out here, you know, it's sort of beyond the pale as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, yeah. So when Jeff Sessions came to California, you saw that as what, a racist dog whistle?
Oh, a campaign tactic.
Yeah, yeah.
Pure and simple.
Yeah, divide the country.
Yeah.
I agree. I agree. Mike, thank you for calling. Thanks for sharing the story. Thanks for listening to us on KPFK in Los Angeles. Tom in Waterloo, Iowa. Hey, Tom, what's on your mind today?
Hello, Tom. I'm calling in response to yesterday's rant in regards to jailing the illegal employers. What I have for me is a newspaper clipping from December 28th of last year talking about Donald Trump commuting the sentence of one Shalon Rabaskin. Shalon Rabaskin was the executive officer of the agri-processors meat plant in Polsville, Iowa, which was the site of one of the biggest immigration raids in U.S. history. I mean, we're talking 389 illegal workers detained, 67 counts of child labor, forgery, identity theft violations, illegal recruiting practices, failure to pay minimum wage, bank fraud, money laundering, and $26 million in delinquent payments to their suppliers. And by the way, he was also a donator to the Republican Party. And to put it bluntly, when Trump commuted his sentence, he committed an act of treason against his own platform and the people who voted him into office. I mean, I just can't believe that he would do such a thing.
Right. Amnesty for rich white employers, no amnesty for, well, in fact, there was just a case yesterday of a Hispanic man, a Mexican man who was here without documentation, here illegally, whose son was born in the United States and was involved in a car accident last year that left him paralyzed from the waist down, his 10-year-old son. And this father, who is the sole caregiver for this son, was deported yesterday. Kid is still here.
Oh, no, dear. Yeah, he really doesn't care much for the workers. But hey, if they want to do the research on it, it's in WCFcourier.com Thursday, December 28th. And if you want to post it on your local Fox blog, I mean, hey, go for it. And while you're at it, they should send a letter to Jeff Sessions asking, you know, why they would support such a thing.
Yeah. Yeah, it's amazing, giving amnesty to, and this is, you know, I've pointed out that I'm assuming it's still going on. It certainly was a few years ago when it became a story. that there are, like the shopping guide newspapers you get, in your local community that have the specials for the supermarkets for the week, or have, that are just a couple of pages and it's all classified ads, help wanted stuff and used bed for sale, that kind of stuff. There's publications like that printed in northern Mexico in Spanish that are nothing but ads from American companies in Spanish saying, if you can get across the border, we'll give you a job. And the meatpacking industry was really big in that. This was maybe a half a decade ago or a decade ago. Lou Dobbs and I used to talk about this on the air before he went totally off the rails. And, it's like the white employers, the wealthy white employers who are, which is the magnet to draw people to this country, not just from Mexico, but from all over the world, without documentation. That's the magnet, and Reagan he stopped enforcing the laws against white employers, and apparently this one guy got busted, you're describing it. That's very much the exception to the rule. And to bring us back to the rule, Trump is essentially pardoning him. Mind-boggling. Tony, thanks for the call. Thanks for the information. Kurt in Goshen, Indiana. Hey, Kurt, what's on your mind?
Yeah, well, I was going to say that Indiana legislature has passed a thing for public schools to hire untrained teachers, 7%, up to 7% per school.
Right, because they're having such a hard time hiring good teachers because, they...
Yeah, it might be that, or it might be... I had seen Tony Bennett talk when Mitch Daniels was the governor, and he was saying that it's better to have untrained teachers that have experience in other things like business, and you can teach business without being a trained teacher, stuff like that. So this has been going on for probably about 6 or 7 years.
Oh, it's been going on longer than that. But
but in Indiana, they've been pushing that, trying to get rid of the unions and stuff like that. And I was so happy to see what West Virginia had done. And I think that it's a story for everybody in the United States. All the teachers saying enough is enough.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing that is missing from your equation and your description, Kurt, is that teaching in and of itself is a skill.
My son is a teacher. I know this.
Yeah,
and my mom and dad were teachers.
Right. Most of us don't know how to teach. One of the reasons why teachers go to teachers' college is to learn how to teach, not just to learn how to teach math or science or art, but to learn how to teach itself. That is a skill set. Yeah. And I learned that big time when I was 18. I owned a TV repair shop in East Lansing, Michigan, and one of my brothers was in high school at the time, and he had a science class, and his he and his teacher invited me to come in and talk about repairing electronics as a potential career path sort of thing. It was I don't know, bring your brother to school day or whatever. But I really got it just that one day in front of that classroom. That there's more to this than just standing up and talking.
Well, and people say that their day is short. My mom and dad, my son, they work till, they work till after school several hours, and then they'd work after we'd go to bed. It was always, they were always busy doing check or grading papers, whatever. And it's just ridiculous.
Well, and these laws
they say that they haven't earned their money.
Right, and these laws like in Indiana that allow a certain percentage of untrained teachers to be in our schools, really the subtext to them is that teaching's not that big a deal, and it's always amazing to me. People,
I agree.
It's sort of like the same with talk radio. People say, oh yeah, anybody can just open the microphone and start blithering. Good luck with that. You learn these things over time, and teaching is something that's learned over time, and like I said, it's an actual skill set. Anyhow, I've got to move along. But Kurt, well said. Thank you, Anita in San Antonio. Hey, Anita, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. I think the reason why Donald Trump is kind of just pulling things out of a hat. I don't know what to call it, but the whole thing with the tariffs and he didn't tell anybody. He didn't plan it. There was no policy. He didn't discuss this with
I have a
anybody.
theory about that, if I may, very quickly.
Okay.
And that is that Pennsylvania, you've got this Connor Lamb, Democrat who's giving Rick Socioni or whatever his name is.
I know all about that.
Yeah, he's giving him a huge run for his money. The steel issue is huge in Pennsylvania. So,
except for the fact steel workers are divided on that issue.
They are.
They're not all, but yes, because some of them work for companies that produce products that use the steel.
Yeah.
And there are going to be a lot of people that lose their jobs because of that.
Yeah.
This is not
No, I understand that,
issue.
but I think that it's going to work to the political advantage of Republicans in the Rust Belt, frankly.
I don't think Donald Trump strategizes about anything. That's just my opinion. And but also the thing with the North Korean meeting with the North Korean dictator, all these things just kind of happened. He didn't discuss it with anybody. Nobody knew. Even the Secretary of State didn't know anything about it.
Yeah.
I think he feels the news tightening with the Mueller investigation and with the Stormy Daniels thing.
I think that's true, but I think he's trying to run a reality show. It's one of the few things he's ever done well in his life is run a reality TV show. He knows how to do it. That's what he's doing in the White House.
He's panicking, especially when that Seychelles Island meeting came out.
Yeah.
And I think that he's really panicking because he's investigating that secret communication.
Yep.
The backdoor communication.
Yep. And it's starting to look like, I don't know if you've seen the bags under his eyes. It's looking like he's not sleeping well, and he's aging rapidly. We know that the White House does that to people, although you would think it wouldn't do that to him because he's spent 100 days so far out of his first year on the golf course. Anita, thank you for the call. I share your concerns. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
It's Anything Goes Friday as we help you win the water cooler wars here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Welcome back. Ed in Albany, Oregon. Hey, Ed, thanks for watching Free Speech TV.
Thank you for getting my call.
Sure, what's on
I've
your
been
mind?
trying for days. Anyway, I'll introduce myself. My name is Ed Hemmingson. I'm in Albany, Oregon. I've been a peace activist since 1948, literally. I worked on the Henry Wallace campaign.
Whoa.
And my theory about Donald Trump is that he's of course, the wild card. He's not fully in control or being controlled by the powers that be, the money holders. And I think it's the war industry. The war industry is the biggest fraud and the biggest moneymaker that the capitalist system has going. And they're if Donald Trump carries through with his line of making peace between North and South Korea, which they, of course, would like to do, they may lose one of their biggest important enemies. And this is a big damage to the war industry. Who are they going to take on next?
Yeah, I can tell you who they're going to take on next. China. They're already preparing it, and Russia as well. But
But they're having a hard time because China's selling all their stuff to us.
Yeah, I know.
I mean, it's not easy.
You're right.
And I think that's the problem.
But
that's the big worry in Washington and Wall Street nowadays.
Yeah.
That they will lose one of their biggest, most important enemies.
Yeah, it's an interesting theory, Ed. I'm not sufficiently wired into the military-industrial complex to know what they are thinking, but you're right. I mean, they suck up half the federal budget. It's a mind-boggling industry.
Yeah, the profit motive has been the biggest destruction of resources and the earth that the earth has ever experienced.
And of our government. And this is
we're the primary sponsors of it now.
Yeah, well, bringing the profit motive into government. Warren Harding in 1920 ran on a platform of less government in business, more business in government. In other words, deregulate and privatize.
Right.
And he did that in the 20s. It kicked off the Roaring 20s, which led directly to the Great Crash of 1929. Reagan ran on essentially the same thing and started the process. And Trump has now put it in on steroids with what Zinke and Pruitt and all these and Mulvaney are doing and all these guys. And
I think they would rather make money with Russia and China and Korea. They think that they can build a more profitable system that way.
Yeah, but government should not be a money-making operation. It shouldn't be run like one. And government should not be selling should not be buying services. There are some services, obviously, government should buy from the private sector, but having having private companies come in and cook for the military, for example.
Exactly.
That's a function that should be a military function. You should have soldiers doing that so that, you know, if the base gets overrun, the soldiers don't have to defend the contractors. They can you know, stop, you know, flipping pancakes and pick up their rifle and go out and shoot. You know?
Well, after the war industry, the next most important function is the propaganda machine.
Yeah.
Build up lies, and so anyway,
yeah,
I think for listening, and hope your folks are listening. Like I said, they must manufacture enemies when they don't have any.
Yeah.
The entire Cold War was the biggest fraud ever perpetrated on the earth.
And it's not like we weren't warned. Dwight Eisenhower in you know, January of 1961 just laid it right out. You know, this is what you've got to worry about, the military-industrial complex. Ed, thanks for
when he was leaving office, he said that.
Yeah. Yeah, it was on his way out. It was the week before he left office, or it was his farewell address. And then, of course, Jack Kennedy was inaugurated a day or three later. Ed, thanks a lot for the call. It's great to hear from you. Thank you for watching Free Speech TV. We'll be right back. It's Friday here on the Thom Hartmann Program, and Mike in Portland, Oregon. Hey, Mike, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. I've heard some shows where you've been recommending or watching some of the current American TV shows. There are cop shows, and I had a couple that you might find interesting.
Yeah, I gave up on American cop shows. Louise and I have been watching Murdoch Mysteries for the last couple months, which is an 1890 Toronto cop show. And it's a brilliant one. But anyhow, yeah, your recommendations. I'd love to hear them, Mike.
Okay. The first one is from the first show is from Canada. It is called Flashpoint. Mm-hmm. And unlike the American shows, this one, they don't believe in shooting bullets. Literally, in individual episodes, I think in the full 5-year run, I think they may have shot, with some exceptions, maybe 1 or 2 rounds an episode, if not that much.
Wow. But
it's about a tactical team called the Strategic Response Unit. The one thing, though, it is a 2x4 when you watch it. It is intense in its writing. Mm. There are a couple of shows I really recommend. There's one in season 2. It is titled Perfect Storm. It features a school shooting, and it goes through the process. And it shows that there are consequences to what happens. They show the triggering event. Then there's a second, and they go through. They eventually get the kid alive. Alive, but it's like they go through alternatives. They try to control the uniform cops, and they're trying to get the kid, and it's up to another character to talk the kid down, and it's an amazing episode.
Okay.
The other one is called Lawman. This is in season 5. And one of the cops in an earlier episode had to shoot and kill someone. It was priority life. It had to be done. And there's a speech at the end of the episode toward the end of the episode, where one of the other kids, the team had taken 2 high school boys who were sons of the 2 male leads on a ride-along, and he explained that, and one of the kids were explaining why his dad had to do it. It was the rules. And you heard, and you see in the episode what happens if you don't. And it's another good one.
Interesting. Mike, I need to move along, but thanks for the suggestions. Flashpoint, Perfect Storm, Lawman, I wrote them down, and I'll discuss it with Louise, and we'll see. We typically watch one show every night. It's Louise's favorite way to go to sleep is watching TV. It doesn't work so well for me. I then listen to the BBC or read, but I enjoy it. It's been interesting. Rick in Weston, West Virginia. Hey, Rick, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom, how you doing? I think we ought to draft you for president in 2020. Your last caller, he ought to add live PD to that show. It runs 24/7 on Dish TV.
Okay.
It's amazing how it does it 24/7. They got a couple other cop shows.
Okay.
But what I was calling about was the upcoming negotiations with North Korea. A lot of people do not realize that Kim Jong, or however you pronounce his name, was educated in the best universities in Switzerland. He has been studying Trump for at least before the election. And we all know Trump. He don't read his presidential daily briefings. He gets all his information secondhand, basically. And,
he gets most of his information from Fox News, it appears.
Yeah, I know that. Fox News is not on Dish anymore. CNN is not. Fake, that fake news, it don't work anymore. But what I'm saying to you is, sir, that if Trump isn't careful, he's liable to get his rear end handed on a platter, and this country will have no options, and there are no winners in a nuclear war, especially over there.
I agree. I think that's why Lindsey Graham yesterday said to Kim that if you try to play Donald Trump, you're going to destroy yourself and your country. And I think what he was saying was, please, Donald Trump is crazy and has a fragile ego, and if you mess with him, the outcome will be unpredictable. And so try to work something out with this guy and be sincere and actually make something happen, as opposed to just, poking the bear, as it were, because...
yeah, really, because, in mainstream media in this country, he's portrayed as a moron, basically, and he is far from it.
No, Kim is a very smart guy.
They're surrounded by nuclear countries. They have a right to defend ourselves. That's nothing gets. We always talk about how great this country is, and some ways yes, some ways no. But who is America to preach about political prisoners, unjust legal systems? I mean...
Yeah, look at Gitmo. I get it, Rick. I would like America to be that shining city on the hill that Ronald Reagan appropriated the phrase from John Kennedy's inauguration. I would love us to once again be that country, but first we've got to close Gitmo. Rick, thanks for the call. Well said. I share your concerns. We'll be back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242.
Or visit tomsbeets.com. Welcome to the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from my book, Unequal Protection, The Rise of Corporate Dominance and the Theft of Human Rights. This is right after in the chapter where I lay out how the Supreme Court in 1886 actually did not rule that corporations are persons, even though the clerk of the court wrote that into the head note. And then we get into, where we got with this. This is page 109, the Republican conspiracy theory that empowered FDR. In the early 1930s, the stock market had collapsed and the world was beginning a long and dark slide into the Great Depression and eventually to World War II. Millions were out of work in the United States, and the questions on people's minds were, why did this happen and who's responsible? The teetering towers of wealth created by American industrialists during the late 1800s and early 1900s were largely thought to have contributed to or caused the stock market crash and ensuing depression. In less than 100 years, corporations had gone from being a legal fiction used to establish colleges and trading companies to standing as the single most powerful force in American politics. Many working people felt that corporations had seized control of the country's political agenda, capturing senators, congressmen, the Supreme Court, and even recent presidents in the magnetic force of their great wealth. Proof of this takeover could be found in Supreme Court decisions in the years between 1908 and 1914, when the Supreme Court, often citing corporate personhood, struck down minimum wage laws, workmen's compensation laws, utility regulation, and child labor laws, every kind of law that a people might institute to protect its citizenry from corporate abuse. Unions and union members were the victims of violence from private corporate armies and had been declared criminal conspiracies by both business leaders and politicians. It seemed that corporations had staged a coup, seizing the lives of American workers, the majority of voters, as well as the elected officials who were supposed to represent them. And this was in direct contradiction to the spirit expressed by the founders of our country. It was in this milieu that an American history book, first published in 1927 but largely ignored, suddenly became a hot topic. In The Rise of American Civilization, Columbia University history professor Charles Beard and women's suffragist Mary Beard suggested that the rise of corporations on the American landscape was the result of a grand conspiracy that reached from the boardrooms of the nation's railroads all the way to the Supreme Court. They fingered two Republicans, former Senator and railroad lawyer Roscoe Conkling, and former Congressman and railroad lawyer John A. Bingham. The theory, in short form, was that Conkling, when he was part of the Senate committee that wrote the 14th Amendment back in 1868, had intentionally inserted the word person instead of the correct legal phrase natural person to describe who would get the protections of that amendment. Bingham similarly worked in the House of Representatives to get the language passed. Once that time bomb was put into place, Conkling and Bingham left elective office to join in litigating on behalf of the railroads, with the goal of exploding their carefully worded amendment in the face of the Supreme Court. Thus, quote, Republican lawmakers, the Beards said, conspired in advance to give full human constitutional rights to corporate legal fictions. By a few words skillfully chosen, they wrote, every act of every state and local government which touched adversely the rights of corporate persons and property was made subject to review and liable to annulment by the Supreme Court at Washington, D.C. This conspiracy theory was widely accepted because the supposed conspirators themselves had said very publicly, we did it. Earlier, in an 1882 case pitting the railroads against San Mateo County, California, Conkling testified as a paid witness for the railroads that he had slipped the person language into the amendment, the 14th Amendment, to ensure that corporations would one day receive the same civil rights Congress was giving to freed slaves. Bingham made similar assertions when appropriate during his terms as a paid witness for the railroads. As a result of these assertions, through the late years of the 1800s, both of these two men were the well-off darlings of the railroad, basking in the light of their successful appropriation of human rights for corporations. When the Beard's book was widely read in the 1930s, it gave names and faces to the villains who had turned control of America over to what were then called the robber barons of industry. Conklin, Bingham, and Justice Waite were all dead by the time of the Great Depression and all judged guilty by the American people of pulling off the biggest con in the history of our republic. The firestorm of indignation that swept the country helped set the stage for Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal, using legislative means and packing the Supreme Court to turn back corporate power and that corporate takeover, at least in part, and returning to average working citizens some of the rights and benefits that they had felt had been stolen from them in that Supreme Court head note in 1886. It was widely accepted that Conkling and Bingham had pulled off this trick successfully, purposefully saying person instead of natural person or citizen when they helped write the 14th Amendment, and corporate personhood was a fait accompli. It was done and couldn't be undone. The Supreme Court, confronted with the reality of the language of the 14th Amendment, had been forced to recognize that corporations were persons under the U.S. Constitution because of the precedent of that 1886 Santa Clara case. Senator Henry Cabot Lodge apparently ratified the coup on January 8, 1915, when he unwittingly promulgated Conkling's myth in a speech to the Senate about the 1882 San Mateo case cited above.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back to the True People's Media, the Thom Hartmann Program. On the line with us, Carl Frisch, the Executive Director of Allied Progress, alliedprogress.org. You can tweet him at Carl, it's with a K, Carl with a K, K-A-R-L, Frisch, F-R-I-S-C-H. And the website is, alliedprogress.org. Carl, welcome back to the program.
Hey, Tom, how are you?
Great. It's always great having you on our program.
Thank you.
You have been doing just yeoman's work. I'm subscribed to your newsletter or your email list or whatever it is you call it. And just day after day, new horrors coming out of Mick Mulvaney and these guys who Trump has put in charge of the agencies that are supposed to protect you and me from being ripped off by our banks and our credit card companies and payday lenders. What's the latest?
Well, I mean, as if what's happening in Congress right now with the banking bill isn't bad enough. I know you've been talking about that, but you know, the one agency in our federal government that is geared towards protecting the pocketbooks of working people from big banks, credit card companies, debt collectors, predatory lenders, et cetera, is under constant attack. Most recently, Allied Progress obtained emails from Mick Mulvaney, and those emails, this is where it gets kind of scary. Mick Mulvaney received an email from the former CEO of a company called World Acceptance Corporation. Stay with me. They're a predatory payday lender. Now, 2 days before this person sent that email, Mick Mulvaney dropped an investigation at the CFPB into that company's deceitful, awful practices. You know, this is a predatory lender that screwed people over, misled them, they were not forthright with what their fees would be, et cetera. And so Mick Mulvaney dropped the investigation into this. Of course, he did that after taking thousands of dollars in campaign contributions from the same company. So we find this email, and the email 2 days after the investigation was dropped, the former CEO of this company asked Mick Mulvaney if he would help her apply for the job of full-time CFPB director to run the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Fox meet hen house.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's more like allowing the fox to pick which order it would eat the hens.
Yeah, it's like putting Hannibal Lecter in charge of a restaurant. I mean, it's.
And it shows a very cozy relationship that Mick Mulvaney has with this industry.
Yeah.
She sent it to his personal email account, from what we can tell. And again, this is somebody in the letter, in the email. She talks about how great they've had a working relationship over the last several years, including while he was in Congress, when her company was giving him campaign contributions. And people say, well, why would she think that she would be an appropriate applicant? And I say just look at the tone that Mick Mulvaney is setting at the CFPB. This is a guy who has changed the mission of the Bureau. I mean, it does say the word consumer on the door when he walks in every day, but he is ignoring that. Instead, he's turning the mission around to protect industry. And I have to stress, he's taken $1.3 million from the very industries that are regulated by the CFPB, and now he's doing their bidding. So she felt comfortable knowing that he was turning the Bureau over to predatory lenders and the worst of the financial industry, so she probably felt she'd be she'd feel right at home in his seat.
That's extraordinary. And over at alliedprogress.org, you guys have been doing an extraordinary job of exposing this. The question that comes to mind is, what can we do about it?
Well, it's a couple things. One, we have to be under constant guard to protect the CFPB.
The Consumer Financial
Protection Bureau, right? It rolls out right off the tongue, doesn't it?
Yeah. It's at least clear,
Yeah. Well, we can call it the Consumer Bureau for short, but be under constant guard for that, because this is something that has been targeted by every financial industry in the country since it was started 5 years ago. And in that 5-year period, it's returned $12 billion to more than 25 million Americans, and it's returning that money directly from the entities on Wall Street that screwed over these consumers. So it's getting that money back and giving it back to the consumer. That is why it's under attack. So we need to be diligent. We need to call on Trump. We did some polling. 70-some% of the American people believe that Trump should compromise when he picks a replacement for the CFPB and pick someone that can earn the support of Democrats as well. We need to monitor this constantly, because the second we take our eye off the ball, conservatives in Congress will go in for the kill, and they'll bring along some Democrats who think nobody's looking.
Well, if the CFPB's if the head of the CFPB requires congressional approval, what's to prevent Trump from doing what he is doing in other agencies, where instead of proposing a new director who needs congressional approval, he simply appoints his own acting director or assistant director and delegates all those responsibilities to that person, positions that don't require congressional approval. So he can just sidestep the whole congressional approval process.
Well, in this case, that's what he's done already. So he can't appoint somebody to this position. We would argue that he's not allowed to appoint somebody to the vacancy, because that should go to the deputy director, and that's a litigation that's currently being played out.
Right, that's how the law is written, actually.
Right, exactly. That's how the law that created the CFPB is written. Now, when he replaces other people that don't have that specific chain of command, he has to pick somebody who has already been approved by the Senate. So they take on basically 2 jobs at once. And that's what we have here. He has Mick Mulvaney, who has been approved to run the Office of Management and Budget, a very big job, also doing this. And, Mulvaney's not watching this 24/7. Instead, he's brought in former lobbyists from industry. He's brought in career staff from Jeb Henserling. He's the biggest foe in Congress of the CFPB. His staffers in to help run the show. And they are systematically, trying to tear it apart. One of the things that they're doing right now is, since none of them are bright enough to actually figure out how to gut the CFPB from the inside, they're actually asking industry, these things called RFIs, requesting for input from the public. They're asking industry to let them know, what should we do on this? What should we do on that? Wow. In essence, getting the legal advice of corporations on every facet of the Bureau for things that he should change.
That's amazing. Is there anything that, as individuals, I mean, is this the sort of thing that we can, contact our members of Congress, or is this just a matter of we need to get, we just need to get Democrats, having enough power and enough elected Democrats that there's no longer this corrupt Republican Party running our country.
Well, we need to always be on constant guard, regardless of who's in power. I think we're seeing that with the Senate banking bill.
Yeah.
But I would say that it probably has a much better chance of surviving, and the important protections that have been put in place over the years will be better enforced if progressives control Congress. So that's an important facet. We need to support the work of people like Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders and Sherrod Brown and Jeff Merkley, who are real champions for the CFPB in the Senate. Maxine Waters, who's a fantastic champion of the CFPB in the House. So we should follow their work and promote their work. But more importantly, every time something happens with Mick Mulvaney, come follow us on Twitter at Allied Progress or Facebook at Allied Progress or on our website at alliedprogress.org. Every time Mulvaney steps out of line, every time he proposes something that is untoward or will hurt consumers, we will let you know, and you should call your representative that very day, because they're not expecting to hear from you about this. They're only expecting you to hear about the things that you're seeing on cable news.
Right.
And they know that the American people, when they learn about the CFPB, 80% of them support it, including Trump people.
Sure. So get thee over to alliedprogress.org and start tweeting at Allied Progress, and check out the Facebook page for Allied Progress and become an activist, become part of the solution.
Right.
Well said, Carl Frisch, the Executive Director of Allied Progress. Keep up the great work, Carl.
Thank you.
Thanks for dropping by today. It's always good talking with you. We'll be back with more of Anything Goes Friday here on the Thom Hartmann Program in just a moment. Stick around. It's coming up on 15 minutes past the hour.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
It's Anything Goes Friday. Back with your calls in just a minute or so. And welcome back. Let's see here. Andrew, watching Free Speech TV on a Roku box in Phoenix, Arizona. Hey, Andrew, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, how's it going?
Good. What's up?
About the new tariffs that Donald Trump has put on for aluminum and steel, I don't think it's going to have a beneficial effect. I also don't think it's going to create any jobs. I definitely don't believe that, the old 1950s and 60s steel mills are going to reappear and, all will be well. I just think that's a false reality.
I don't entirely disagree. I do, however, know that the neoliberal trade policies that started in a big way under the Reagan administration and were put on steroids when GATT became NAFTA and the WTO during the Clinton administration, that those things have devastated the American working class and built the Chinese middle class. We took China from being, probably in the, 100 down to being the number one or number two in terms of economic power in the world by shipping our jobs to China. And we've got to figure out a way to get our stuff back, making things back in the United States. This is a national security issue. We can't make a cruise missile without chips from China. And we might go to war with China. We can't build tanks without steel that we don't make here in the United States any longer.
Well, Tom, actually, we do still make steel here. It's
just not enough.
We don't employ that many people to do it anymore.
Well, that's true. I mean, that's true.
The same thing is in China. They're not employing. A lot of steel companies probably, you could say, are there, but they're not employing, a whole bunch of workforce for it. They're, of course, doing it through automation.
Instead of having three people per ton produced, they're down to one person per ton produced. But still, somebody has to build the steel mill, somebody has to run the steel mill, somebody's marketing it, the profits from the steel. All of those things should be within the United States. I'm in favor of a tariff-based trade system. I'm in favor of an America First trade policy. And just because Donald Trump campaigned on it and won on it, and by the way, the majority of Americans are in favor of this, doesn't mean that we should throw it out. Progressive Democrats have been in favor of tariff-based trade policies ever since Well, I mean, the big schism in the Democratic Party happened in 1992 when Bill Clinton came out in favor of NAFTA, and Ross Perot, who had previously been a Democrat, I think, maybe not, I don't know.
He was a Republican.
Yeah, okay, he was. Yeah, that makes more sense that he was a Republican. But anyhow, Ross Perot started, his Reform Party, that we're gonna fight back against this. And he got 20% of the vote just based on that. Progressive Democrats since the 90s have been opposed to the DLC policies, the neoliberal policies that Bill Clinton was promoting, and I'm with them. I mean, to this day, the Progressive Caucus, the Congressional Progressive Caucus, has been supporting tariffs forever. I mean,
but Tom, why not fight China on intellectual property, which is a huge concern nowadays? I mean, this tariff is not going to affect them. It won't do anything to them whatsoever.
Well, marginally. We represent about 3% of their steel exports. And intellectual property is a whole completely separate issue, but and can be subject to tariff provisions as well. And yeah, we're getting ripped off, particularly in China. But, I think that we need manufacturing is how a nation creates wealth. It's not service economies, it's manufacturing economies. Andrew, thank you for the call. We'll be back. It's Anything Goes Friday on the Thom Hartmann Program, the True People's Media. Charles in Opelika, Florida. Hey, Charles, what's on your mind?
Hey, good afternoon, Tom.
Hey, Charles.
Hope I'm coming in clear, but I think we've talked about this before. I think I heard it from you, or at least on the show. That it seems like the Republicans was running a soft coup on the American public.
With regard to what?
This is just a takeover, and this takeover is just encompassing, all of these different government agencies.
Yeah, I would back up just a little bit, Charles, and I would say that the billionaire class and the transnational corporate class have executed a soft coup in the United States, and they did it by first seizing control of the Republican Party.
Okay, that's true. So now, with these coming talks with South Korea, it's not that they're going. I don't think that they're going. Whoever's going to be, doing it with Trump, as far as American, what America wants. It seems as if it doesn't matter what the people want. It's only about corporate interests, and it just seems like no wonder he didn't stock the State Department, and they fired a lot of people that was there. Is because these corporations are running everything.
Yeah. I think you're right, Charles. I mean, Jimmy Carter on this program 3 or 4 years ago said the United States is no longer a democracy. We are now an oligarchy, and we should acknowledge it. It's the result of the Citizens United decision and the Buckley decision in '76. They've all together, basically put the billionaire class and the big corporations in charge. And you nailed it. And that's why I think that the Republican Party should be held to account under the RICO laws, the Racketeering Influenced Organized Crime. Because they're basically functioning as an organized crime entity on behalf of the billionaire class. So well said, Charles. Leon in Maroa, Illinois. Hey, Leon, what's on your mind today?
Happy Friday, Tom.
Back at you, Leon.
having a better day today than yesterday, I hope.
Yeah.
What I was calling about, I tried to call yesterday and rescue against the lady in California that was ranting. I saw an instance several years ago. I'm a retired union pipe fitter from Central Illinois, and I traveled to Cincinnati to work at Procter & Gamble.
Mm-hmm.
At the time, they were making a unit to make the Olean in synthetic oil. Anyway, when we drove up on the job, there were informational pickets up. There were non-union insulators on the job, and most of them were Hispanics. There was about 3 or 4 days went by, and they disappeared. We were told. I worked.
They being the pickets or being the workers?
The workers disappeared.
Okay, the non-union Hispanics.
Right, and the instance, the way it happened. We got off early in the morning, maybe 3 o'clock in the morning. We were working 10s, and the Pinkerton guards about filled their pants when the immigration officers flashed their badge, took the job over one morning. They filtered into the job. When the shift came in, then they started flashing their badges and trying to arrest these folks, more or less, round them up. And there was 100 on the job. We heard that they jumped the fence, they ran, they got 39 out of the 100.
Mm-hmm.
And the way we heard, I was told by my foreman, the secretary in the office she tipped this off. One fellow had a Social Security number, and each one that signed up on the roster added 1 digit to the number.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when I worked in the refineries down by Wood River, down by St. Louis, we had to present a Social Security card within 3 days. Even if you had passed your well test, you were laid off if you didn't present that.
Yeah.
So, like you say, I think they need to arrest the people that hire these folks. I mean, good God, they want to make a living. They want to feed themselves and their families, but right's right, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I've been saying, I read, there's a chapter about this in my book, Rebooting the American Dream, that Bernie Sanders endorsed back in 2010 when that book came out, 8 years ago. And I talk about David Ricardo's On Labor, in 1813, his seminal piece on how labor markets, how wages go up and go down depending on how tight a labor market is. And so when you flood more people into a labor market, of course, you're going to have a lowering of wages. And that, countries need to be strategic about this. Countries need to protect their labor forces by controlling the size of their labor market. And part of that is immigration. And that was just blown all to hell in 1986 when Ronald Reagan stopped enforcing the law against employers. And with the possible exception of the guy who called earlier about the meatpacking plant, I don't know of any wealthy white employers who have gone to jail. It's always the poor Hispanics who really just came here because they're trying to help their families out, and in many cases their families were wiped out by U.S. agriculture policies of subsidizing corn production that we're then exporting into Mexico, and we've literally run a million Mexican farmers off their farms, and it's not the quote brown people. It's not the invasion of Mexicans that is a challenge or a problem to the United States. It's the largely white, wealthy corporate employers who are putting out the word that, hey, there's a job here for you if you come here. And then who bears the burden of it? It's the working people. Leon, I got to go, but thank you for the call. Very well said. And thanks for sharing your story with us. We'll be back. We're hitting the bottom of the hour.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Exposing the con and conservative. It's the Thom Hartmann Program. Back with more of Anything Goes Friday right after this. It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today our book is George Lynn's Breaking the Trance. We're reading from Chapter 2. The title, Brains Awash in Adrenaline, What Overclocking the Brain Does to the Bodies, Minds, and Nervous Systems of Screen-Dependent Children. That would be as in computer and, phone screens. Quote, we design our games to hook them in. Part of the hook is how we build the games, to deliberately overclock their minds. Most people think at about 600 words a minute. We make them think at 1,000 words a minute. End of quote. This revelation was said in the course of a conversation with an executive of a large gaming company. This man thought that there was nothing wrong with what he was doing. In fact, he said, quote, "We hire PhDs in psychology to help engineer our games to be successful, to get kids stuck on them," end quote. In order for a video game or other screen medium to be financially successful, two things in terms of brain function should occur. It must be fun, which increases the availability of pleasure neurons in the brain, and it must create a strong tendency toward compulsive use. A screen medium must contain what game manufacturers term compulsion loops, meaning the game is programmed to pull children into the play and then repeatedly frustrate them while offering incremental rewards as they play, as the play proceeds through various levels. To build brain dependence on a particular screen medium, use of the medium has to be exciting. In terms of function of the human nervous system, it has to trigger the general adaptation syndrome, the GAS, also known as the fight or flight stress reaction pattern. When the GAS comes on, it blows vast amounts of adrenaline into the nervous system. Child and adolescent clients with bipolar disorder, as well as those with an issue with screen dependence, say they can actually feel adrenaline as heat rising upward from the midriff. Adrenaline is felt as excitement. It is this excitement that pulls a child into the pattern of chronic screen use and dependence. The brain develops long-term dependence on screen media use through the accumulation of the chemical precursor to adrenaline, which is dopamine. The following diagram provides an overview of how dopamine leads to dependence over time, and he's got a nice diagram of this. Dependence on a particular medium follows the chronic release of adrenaline. Even if the child becomes angry or frustrated playing a particular video game, the experience of adrenaline while in this angry state is felt as pleasure. Many of the children and adolescents we work with tell us that it feels really good to get really angry. For them, breaking things in a fit of angry frustration while playing a video game actually has a payoff. The payoff is an elevation in adrenaline, which feels good. The more adrenaline released, the greater the dependence. Research suggests that a massive multiplayer online role-playing game, MMORPG, is the most adrenalized screen medium. Examples are League of Legends, World of Warcraft, and Clash of Clans. But children may also become dependent on the experience of their minds floating through hours of YouTube videos or searching or surfing on Twitter or Snapchat as a behavior-shaping force, pushing their behavior in certain predictable directions. As adrenaline goes up, the brain goes into hyperdrive, and the child experiences a period of enhanced focus on his screen media. As screen media use continues uninterrupted for hours, more disturbing results are seen. Research shows that these media present highly arousing, abnormal sensory inputs to the brain's activating system. Downstream effects of this arousal include a markedly decreased attention span, an increase in brain metabolism patterns similar to that seen in drug addicts, an increase in short-term aggression for violent video games, especially in younger children and boys, along with an increased likelihood of later antisocial behavior, deterioration of brain executive functioning, which includes remembering, planning, and inhibiting impulsivity, increased vigilance, irritability, and depression, sleep disorders, development of anxiety disorders, and the risk of receiving a diagnosis of ADHD at age 7 that increases with every hour of media use for young children. If a child uses recreational screen media for more than an hour a day, some of the downstream effects noted in the previous section will start to materialize. The brain can deal with screen media use in moderation, but if it is pushed by a compulsion loop, damage will occur. Chronic excessive screen time eventually exhausts the brain with the buildup of corticotrophin-releasing factor, CRF, that accompanies adrenaline. This neurochemical kicks the brain into high gear when so commanded by the stress reaction and stimulates the release of cortisol. Cortisol pushes the nervous system into action, but if stress goes on chronically, the presence of cortisol can result in damage to the brain's memory circuits and other structures tasked to attention, mood, and impulse control. As stated earlier, brain executive function is impacted by chronic screen overuse. Stress retards the function of the brain center tasked for memory, the hippocampus. And when this happens, the child's short-term memory will start slipping. He will forget things and become disorganized. His ability to think efficiently and solve problems or remember basic facts will slip. Homework hour becomes hell hour, with his parents trapped in the role of suspicious overseers. The brain can heal, but it needs time and cessation of the hyperadrenalized state for a period to recharge. If it does not get this relief, the kindling effects begins, causing the deterioration of brain structures associated with mood stability. Chronic play causes the child to experience anxiety and a mild to moderate irritable depression. Research on the impact of these mood states suggests that if depression or anxiety remains untreated, it becomes worse over time. The slow burn eventually engulfs the brain. George Lynn's book, Breaking the Trance. Welcome back to Anything Goes Friday here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Larry in Lancaster, California. Hey, Larry, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, I want to talk about immigration in California, but first I want to ask you, I think it's New Zealand that you were going to try to move to when Bush was elected.
It was Norway. It's where my my grandfather and grandmother came from.
All right, you said how hard it was for you to become a citizen there. Does that make them racist?
No, it makes them nationalist. I didn't really try. I just called the embassy and asked what the criteria was. And the first thing was that you had to speak fluent Norwegian, which completely disqualified me. But what's your point, Larry? I'm all in favor of immigration laws. I think that, as I said in the last half hour, countries need to protect their labor forces by regulating carefully, and their economies, by regulating carefully the number of people who come into the potential labor force, the workplace, and countries need to defend their borders. The problem we have in the United States is not that people are coming into the United States and overstaying their visas, and that is some massive epidemic of criminality. That happens here. It happens all over the world. The problem is that when I went to Australia to work, I was giving a lecture. I was just lecturing. I was just touring the country giving lectures, but I was paid. When I went to Australia to work, it took me a month and a half before I left to get a work permit. When I lived for a year in Germany, it took me 6 months to get a work permit. If I had been in any of those, in either of those, and frankly the same thing in England, if the, for a speaking tour, in any of those countries, if you overstay your visa and you try to get a job, your employer, you cannot find an employer. They, because no employer wants to go to jail. No employer wants to get fined for hiring people who are not citizens. And when Reagan stopped enforcing those laws in '86, and no president has reinforced them since with any kind of, vigor or enthusiasm, those laws that hit largely wealthy white employers, when he stopped enforcing those laws, those employers started aggressively recruiting people from south of the border who were willing to work for less money because they could send it home. It meant more money in their home country, and who were exploitable. And the exploitation of those people is perhaps the most vicious part of this. And to try to stop the exploitation of them, that's the whole point of the sanctuary cities and states movement, is to stop exploiting people. But what we really need to do is we need to begin prosecuting the employers again. And we need to have a rational and sensible conversation about immigration into the United States and what we want our immigration laws to be. And I'm perfectly fine with even having a conversation about whether we're going to change the 14th Amendment and change birthright citizenship. I don't have a problem with that. I could argue either side of that. But we're not having those conversations because Trump and all these Republicans are demagoguing this stuff and trying to turn it all into a racial issue. Back to you, Larry.
Hey, all right, I agree with you that we need to go after the employees. But when you got California passing laws, giving them driver's license, and then once they have a driver's license, making it legal for them to vote.
Larry, you don't have to be a citizen to get a driver's license anywhere in the United States. You can come over here from France and get a driver's license. Driver's licenses don't require citizenship.
Yeah, they do.
No, they don't.
A legal document.
Excuse me, my producer is not a U.S. citizen, and she has a driver's license and has for decades. I hope that's okay if I say that. She's got a green card. If you're here legally, you can get a driver's license. The problem is
illegal.
Yeah, the problem is if you're here illegally getting a driver's license, and individual states then are looking at this going, okay, there's a harm versus benefit equation here. If you're, Larry, if you live in Lancaster, California, if you're driving down the street and you are hit, your car is hit, and your kid is injured as a result of it, by a person who does not have a driver's license and who then just takes off, and you have no way of knowing who that person is, and you have no way of getting to them, that's a considerable harm to you and to the state of California. If at least that person has a driver's license, even if they're not a citizen, you can hold them to account. You can get some sort of reparation. You can so the states.
Hey, Tom, you going to keep filibustering over me?
I'm not filibustering you, Larry. I'm trying to explain this. I haven't cut you off.
I understand what you're saying. Yes,
so I'm just saying, some states are saying we would rather have safety than enforce immigration laws.
Let me respond.
Go for it.
Respond. But then they get a driver's license, and California made it illegal for them to vote when they're not citizens of California.
No, they don't vote.
Yes, they do vote.
No, they don't. It's a crime to vote if you're not a citizen.
Do you think they care? They're here illegally. Do you think they care about the crime of voting illegally?
Yes, I do.
The only way you guys.
I don't think illegal immigrants in this. No, Larry, I am going to filibuster you here on this because you're completely wrong. And you know who proved that you're wrong? George W. Bush. George W. Bush spent $75 million over a 6.5-year period looking for people in the United States who were illegal immigrants who had voted. He found 6 of them. In 7 years, 6.5 years, was $75 million spent. Chris Kobach right now is in a lawsuit in Kansas. He has prevented 1 in 7 Kansans from voting, trying to prevent illegal immigrants from voting. And so far, he has found 1 illegal immigrant who was voting illegally. Larry, your story, you're not able to talk over me, Larry. I'm sorry. Your story is wrong. Either you are being a sucker, you're believing the stuff that you're hearing on Fox News and right-wing hate radio, or I don't know why else you would say that, because there is no evidence that somebody who is in this country illegally is willing to risk 2 years in prison by showing up at a polling place. Who in their right mind would do that?
Tom?
I'm waiting, Larry.
Starting in April, if you have a California driver's license, you're automatically registered to vote. Do you think they really care if they're going to go to jail or not?
Yes.
When they want to vote Democratic to keep California sanctuary state?
Yes, they do, number one. And number two, you're not automatically registered to vote. I just went through this in Oregon, getting an Oregon driver's license. When you fill out the form, you can check the box, yes, please register me to vote. But then you have to sign a thing that says, under penalty of perjury, I swear that I'm a U.S. citizen and eligible to vote. And yes, you have to sign that form in California as well.
Yeah, but the point is they don't care. They're here illegally, breaking laws. Why would they care about that?
Because they could go to prison for 2 years. It's the same reason that illegal immigrants in this country have a lower crime rate than native-born Americans, because they're being careful. They know that they're here illegally, so they're less likely to commit crimes, and they are absolutely unlikely to vote.
That's because there's more United citizens here. Percentage-wise, they have a higher crime rate.
No, that's not true. Percentage-wise, Larry, on a per capita basis, percentage-wise, illegal immigrants have a much lower crime rate, unless you consider illegal immigration itself to be a crime, which, I'll give you. You can make that argument. But if you set that aside, they have a much lower crime rate than do native-born Americans. I don't mean Native Americans.
That's why California is the 50th lowest quality state out of the 50 states. California is that now, and it used to not be that way in California. Right. Now all the immigrants are here.
Larry, you are completely blowing up your argument. I mean, with that kind of nonsense, you're completely blowing up your argument. In any case, I'm going to move along. Jim in Minneapolis, listening on KTNF, where I will be this weekend. Hey, Jim, what's up?
Hi, Tom. How are you doing?
Good.
I have a question about the Second Amendment.
Sure.
In the last week, 2 people, one a friend of mine, another one I saw on TV, have said that the purpose of the Second Amendment is to keep an oppressive government from, oppressing us. And I thought I remember months ago you saying that's an argument that has only come up in the last, 20, 30 years.
Yeah.
I don't see anything in the Second Amendment that would indicate that's purpose. It looks to me like they didn't want to have a standing army, so they wanted to have, the people out in the country with weapons in case we were invaded from outside.
That's right.
Where did that argument... Yeah.
They wanted a well-regulated militia. That argument started that we had to have our guns to protect ourselves from an oppressive government. That started with the John Birch Society in the 1950s, and then the NRA kind of picked it up, and it's gone viral in the right-wingosphere. But I have actually read the proceedings of the Constitutional Convention, or at least a damn good chunk of them, particularly the part that had to do, well, the Second Amendment was not debated at the Constitutional Convention itself in 1787, in August of 1787 in Philadelphia, but it was discussed at that convention, and it was, of course, debated in the ratifying conventions, in the state ratifying conventions at length. In fact, the Virginia ratifying convention of 1788, I think it was, might have been 89, extensive conversation about this between James Madison, Patrick Henry, and George Mason. And at that point in time, Patrick Henry's concern was that he wanted the Virginia Slave Patrol to be maintained as an independent entity, and he was concerned that the first draft of the Second Amendment that Madison had presented said, you know, to preserve for the security of a nation. And Patrick Henry said, if you do that, then if you get a president who's opposed to slavery, he could enlist our slaves and free them. And so Madison, in deference to Henry, changed the word nation to the word state, so that the individual states could maintain their militias, including the states Georgia, Virginia, South Carolina, North Carolina, and Alabama that had slave patrols that were mandatory. You had to, if you were a man between 17 and 47, you had to sign up for the slave patrols and go out at least once a month looking for runaway slaves. So those were the forces that were at work. Never did any of the founders of this country, never. You will find no reference to this. And if you could, by the way, the people who are promoting this would be quoting Jefferson or Washington or somebody. They would be quoting it up the yin-yang. You cannot find a single reference to any founder of this country who is saying that they think that the people of this country should overthrow by violence their own country and therefore should be armed. No reference whatsoever. It's a complete myth. Well, Jim, thanks a lot for the call. It's good to hear from you. I hope I can see you this weekend. We'll be back. It's 15 minutes before the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program, the place where despair is not an option.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Back with more of Anything Goes Friday right after this. And welcome back. Tim in Madison, Alabama. Hey, Tim, thanks for watching Free Speech TV on your Roku box. What's up?
Hey, Tom. Good to talk to you.
Thank you.
I just had a thought about what was just said about opposing modern military force, and you can see how that's working out in Syria.
Yeah, exactly.
So, yeah, even a M16 is not going to be a match for an Apache helicopter.
You're absolutely right. And even the poorest country these days can get an Apache helicopter in their military.
Right.
Yeah, it's a fantasy. It's just like the fantasy that if you have 20% of your teachers armed, they're somehow going to stop the next guy who comes in with an AR-15. It's a fantasy, too.
Right, right. But what I want to talk about, the other day you mentioned something that stuck in my mind about putting kids on psychoactive drugs and SRIs and things and the consequences of that. And you said it, decreases empathy and allows you to see people as things.
That's correct.
So that's turning everybody into psychopaths. I mean, is that what we really want?
You're right. I mean, the definition of a sociopath or a psychopath is, broadly speaking, somebody who doesn't view other people as fully human. They think of themselves as the only real human in the world, and everybody else is simply an object to be manipulated for their pleasure or gratification or whatever. And to a certain extent, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor drugs and some other families of drugs, but the SSRIs are the most notorious for this, diminish your ability to feel empathy for other people, including yourself, which is why they put you at increased risk of suicide. The number one risk of taking SSRI drugs is not homicide, it's suicide. And I would argue that many of these school shooters who have been taking these drugs are going into the schools as an act of suicide, and they're just taking a whole bunch of people down with them when they go. It's going out in a blaze of glory in their minds. So, yeah, I think that this is a real problem, and I think, I am not a fan of SSRIs. I realize there is a small group of people in the United States, a small population, who are suffering from intractable depression, serious, severe depression, for whom these drugs have been godsends. And so I'm not arguing they should be taken off the marketplace. But I think we are wildly overprescribing them, And we really need to be looking at things like EEG neurofeedback and cognitive behavioral therapy and EMDR and some of these other non-pharmaceutical interventions that actually work to treat depression, to treat chronic depression even, and rather than just simply throwing drugs at everybody.
Prescription.
Say what?
That's not as easy as writing a prescription, is sending somebody out the door.
And it's not as profitable, and you don't have detail men from the EEG clinics or from the psychologists who are doing, cognitive behavioral therapy. You don't have, detail men from those groups coming into the doctor's offices and giving them all kinds of freebies and sending them to Hawaii on $10,000 paid weekend vacations to be educated and giving them, free samples and stuff. It just, it's unfortunate, but the drug industry has pretty much a monopoly on the ears of the doctors in this country and the nurses increasingly.
Yeah, I just think we need more empathy, not less, and more sensitivity.
Yeah, very well said. Very well said.
To our fellow human beings. And one other thing I picked up, also, there's a recent study that showed that opioids over the long term are not any more effective than regular types of painkillers.
Yeah, I think it depends on the kind of pain, but we have probably overestimated the ability of opiates to diminish pain. On the other hand, there are, just like with the SSRIs, there are some people who really can't survive without opiates. And we just, we're going after things with a shotgun, going after flies with a shotgun. We need to be much more careful. It's Anything Goes Friday here on the Thom Hartmann Program, but let's check in with Talk Media News and find out what's going on in the world today. This report brought to you by goatsfortheoldgoat.com, and Ellen Ratner's new book, Loving What You Do. On the line with us is the chief foreign correspondent for Talk Media News, Luke Vargas. You can follow Luke on Twitter at The Courier. And Luke, Kim Jong-un and Donald Trump, really?
Yeah, we'll see. I have to say, I think the response to this has been pretty encouraging so far. Obviously, I think there are a lot of things this administration has not proved itself capable of doing very well, which suggests that the preparations for this meeting, the sort of briefings that you'd expect Trump to have, the paying attention to all the nuances of the relationship that the average American diplomat would, pay attention to going into a meeting like this probably aren't going to occur. And that does make it at least seem possible that what could be a dramatic diplomatic opening could all fizzle apart very quickly if Trump sort of doesn't read the room very well. But that said, even folks I've spoken to in the past day or so who have been critics of Trump on a lot of other foreign policy issues, who criticized the way the Obama administration also went about this relationship, have been expressing to me some, optimism here that, we've been working on the North Korean issue so long, and at least going back to the Clinton years, hadn't really thought to get America's most senior, folks involved in this, namely the president. And that's so we might as well just give that a shot and see what happens. But the interagency process is so broken. It doesn't seem like there's terribly strong cooperation between the South Korean foreign policy establishment and the White House, which means the meeting that their president has with Kim Jong-un only weeks before President Trump's, it's sort of up for question whether or not all the important takeaways from that meeting are going to be sent back to Washington and then incorporate it into what President Trump does. He may just sort of go in and wing it without taking cues from our allies.
Well, here's my prediction on this, and correct me if I have any of the factual details on this wrong, the setup for this. Bill Clinton, I believe, negotiated a deal with Kim's father, where we basically reduced the sanctions on North Korea. We gave them money, actually. It wasn't quite foreign aid. But
oil.
So we made life better for them. And in exchange for that, he stopped their nuclear program. He allowed inspectors into the country, and they put live cameras in all their nuclear sites so that were continuously monitored. Bill Clinton was mercilessly attacked for that by Republicans, saying that he had caved into Kim, the elder Kim. And so when George W. Bush came in, acting tough, he pulled all that stuff. He stopped the subsidies. He stopped the cooperation with North Korea. He named them as part of the axis of evil. And at that point, North Korea said, okay, to hell with this. We're going to go back to building nukes. I mean, look at what he did to Iraq. And Bush was not able to deal with it. Obama was not able to deal with it because he's a Democrat. And if he had made any kind of concession to North Korea at all, the Republicans would have crawled all over him. And so now you've got Trump. I predict that when he goes to North Korea, Kim is going to give him the full Saudi treatment. It's not like the rest of the leaders of the world haven't figured out how to get Trump on their side. Trump doesn't care about democracy. He doesn't have those concerns that Obama had about supporting dictatorial regimes. So Trump will simply probably cut the exact same deal Bill Clinton had. Kim will be happy with that. The world will be a safer place. Trump will get nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize, and the Republicans won't go after him because he's a Republican and not a Democrat. Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, two things. So the folks I've spoken with on this issue in recent months would add one thing to the Clinton tale, which is that, yes, all of the nuclear power and enrichment sites that were being monitored as a part of that deal, I think in 1994, it was found out later on that North Korea was sort of playing by the rules on the exact wording of that deal. But several months after they signed that agreement with the United States, began working on another way of developing their nuclear program using enriched uranium. So they were cheating. They did sort of work.
But they were cheating within the letter of the law. Sort of the way that your bank sticks it to you. Got it.
And on sort of what Kim Jong-un might, how he might treat President Trump or give him something in return to make, sort of help him play the political game back at home. I think there's a possibility here. They may, I don't think, some folks I had seen speculating saying, Kim's going to help Trump in the midterms by giving him a promise to stop the enrichment. I don't think a promise is enough for Trump to walk away. I think that the political capital that Kim Jong-un could hand President Trump are prisoners. I mean, there are still 4 American prisoners who are in the country, and we saw in that State of the Union address the extent to which President Trump really leaned into personal stories, pulling people up as an example of the merits of his policy.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I had completely forgotten that they were holding 4 Americans there.
Of course, a terrible crime, and I think in all those cases, these people shouldn't be in jail, and we obviously need to find a way to get them back. But, are 4 Americans a distraction, or, that could really mask a lack of progress on the nuclear issue? I guess that's one thing I would be wary of.
The Republicans have certainly demonstrated they can take the lives of 4 Americans and turn them into, look at Benghazi, turn them into, a multi-million-dollar, multi-year-long, hysterical crusade. So I would think that getting 4 prisoners back, they will be able to really milk that one good. Luke Vargas with Talk Media News. Luke, I'm always informed by you. Thank you so much for dropping by.
Thank you. Talk to you soon.
Great talking with you. We'll be back. It's Anything Goes Friday here on the Thom Hartmann Program. More of your calls right after this, coming up on the top of the hour. Stick around, helping you win the water cooler wars here on the Thom Hartmann Program.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242.
Or visit tomsbeets.com. It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club, and today we're reading from Arundhati Roy's brilliant book, Capitalism, A Ghost Story. This is from the afterword at the very end of the book. Yesterday morning, the police cleared Zuccotti Park, but today the people are back. The police should know that this protest is not a battle for territory. We're not fighting for the right to occupy a park here or there. We're fighting for justice. Justice is not just for the people of the United States, but for everybody. What you've achieved since September 17th, when the Occupy movement began in the United States, is to introduce a new imagination, a new political language into the heart of the empire. You've reintroduced the right to dream into a system that tried to turn everybody into zombies, mesmerized into equating mindless consumerism with happiness and fulfillment. As a writer, let me tell you, this is an immense achievement. I cannot thank you enough. We are talking about justice. Today, as we speak, the Army of the United States is waging a war of occupation in Iraq and Afghanistan. U.S. drones are killing civilians in Pakistan and beyond. Tens of thousands of U.S. troops and death squads are moving into Africa. If spending trillions of dollars of your money to administer occupations in Iraq and Afghanistan is not enough, a war against Iran is being talked up. Ever since the Great Depression, the manufacture of weapons and the export of war have been key ways in which the United States has stimulated its economy. Just recently, under President Obama, the United States made a $60 billion arms deal with Saudi Arabia. It hopes to sell thousands of bunker busters to the United Arab Emirates. It has sold $5 billion worth of military aircraft to my country, India, my country, which has more poor people than all the poorest countries of Africa put together. All these wars, from the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki to Vietnam, Korea, Latin America, have claimed millions of lives. All of them fought to secure the, quote, American way of life, end quote. Today we know that the American way of life, the model that the rest of the world is meant to aspire toward, has resulted in 400 people owning the wealth of half the population of the United States. It has meant thousands of people being turned out of their homes and jobs while the U.S. government bailed out banks and corporations. American International Group alone was given $182 billion in the bailout. The Indian government worships U.S. economic policy. As a result of 20 years of the free market economy, today 100 of India's richest people own assets equal to 1/4 of the country's GDP, while more than 80% of Indian people live on less than 50 cents a day. 250,000 farmers driven into a spiral of death have committed suicide. We call this progress and now think of ourselves as a superpower. Like you, we are well qualified, we have nuclear bombs and obscene inequality. The good news is that people have had enough and are just not going to take it anymore. The Occupy movement has joined thousands of other resistance movements all over the world in which the poorest of people are standing up and stopping the richest corporations in their tracks. Few of us dreamed that we would see it, the people of the United States on our side, trying to do this in the heart of empire. I don't know how to communicate the enormity of what this means. The 1% say we don't have demands. They don't know, perhaps, that our anger alone would be enough to destroy them. But there are some things, a few pre-revolutionary thoughts I had for us to think about together. We want to put a lid on this system that manufactures inequality. We want to put a cap on the unfettered accumulation of wealth and property by individuals as well as corporations. As capitalists and Luddites, we demand, 1, an end to cross-ownership in business. For example, weapons manufacturers cannot own TV stations. Mining corporations cannot run newspapers. Business houses cannot fund universities. Drug companies cannot control public health funds. 2,
Natural resources and essential infrastructure, water supply, electricity, health, and education cannot be privatized. 3, everybody must have a right to shelter, education, and health care. 4, the children of the rich cannot inherit their parents' wealth. This struggle has reawakened our imagination. Somewhere along the line, capitalism reduced the idea of justice to mean just human rights. The idea the idea of dreaming of equality became blasphemous. We're not fighting to tinker with reforming a system that needs to be replaced. As a capist and a lidite, I salute your struggle. Salam and Zimbad Dad. That's the end of the book. This is from the very opening of it, chapter 1. Is it a house or a home? A temple to the new India or a warehouse for its ghosts? Ever since Antilla arrived in Altamont Road in Mumbai, exuding mystery and a quiet menace, things have not been the same. Here we are, the friend who took me there said. Pay your respects to our new ruler. Antilla belongs to India's richest man, Mukesh Ambani. I'd read about this most expensive dwelling ever built, the 27 floors, 3 helipads, 9 lifts, hanging gardens, ballrooms, weather rooms, gymnasiums, 6 floors of parking, and 600 servants. Nothing had prepared me for the vertical lawn, a soaring 27-story high wall of grass attached to a vast metal grid. The grass was dry in patches, bits have fallen off in neat rectangles, clearly trickle down hadn't worked. But gush up certainly has. That's why in a nation of 1.2 billion, India's 100 richest people own assets equivalent to 1/4 of the GDP. And then Arundhati Roy goes on from there talking about how India is kind of an example of capitalism run amok. Capitalism, a Ghost Story by Arundhati Roy.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and it's Anything Goes Friday. Mike in Fort Collins, Colorado. Hey, Mike, what's on your mind today?
Well, I wanted to talk about the undocumented workers that we have in this country, and there was an interesting article here today in the Denver Post, and apparently the national cap for visas for things other than farm workers, it's only 67,000. That's the H-2B program.
Right.
And I want to tell you that the Hispanics that come up here, they're here to work. They'll work till 4th of July because it's not. They say it's not our holiday.
Yeah.
And I was in drywall for many years. We did a lot of tenant finish work. A lot of these people don't want you in their offices before 5 o'clock. So a lot of times we had crews from 5 p.m. to 1:30 in the morning working. These guys, yeah, sure, I'll work because that we usually popped them another couple of bucks for these off hours.
Right.
And because I don't think that Americans will do that kind of work. I've had superintendents clean the wax out of my ears because my crew isn't there on a job. They're probably still in bed with the barmaid and hungover.
Yeah. Well, that's a separate argument because I would say in response to that if you can't run a business in the United States and pay your workers a decent wage, you have no business running a business. But that's a whole separate thing. But Larry, the guy who had called earlier, it's interesting. Twitter just immediately took him to task. Christy Brown tweeting the study Larry quoted about California being the worst state to live in. It's a Fox News article, and it completely misrepresents the U.S. News study. Broken into 8 categories. California's number 4. Larry's confused. But the headline on Fox News is California has, quote, worst quality of life in U.S. study says, which is not what the study says. And secondly, For American Values tweeted out a picture of a California driver's license for somebody who's not a citizen, and it says right on the driver's license, federal limits apply. In other words, this is not, and there's no gold star on it, so you cannot use it as federal identification, and you cannot use it to vote. And so, you know, Larry was either misinformed or he was one of those trolls. We had several of these calls yesterday from people we've never heard from before, you know, who were just going off on this. And I think they're just, I think they're trying to spread hatred, basically, of people who are not white. That in my world, that's what it boils down to. Back to you.
Well, you know, we're paying, you know, the company that I work for, we paid well. We weren't paying these guys like $10 an hour, sort of a thing. And there's another paragraph in this article says there's a landscape company that's looking for people to like run snow plowers, you know, like on the front of a truck to run out and scrape the snow off of parking lots. $30 an hour, and they couldn't find anybody.
Wow.
I mean, to me, that's ridiculous. Yeah. I'm in Fort Collins. If that was in Aurora, if I had seen that and I'd been down the street from, I'd be down there. I'd be down there in.
Yeah, I have a hard time believing that they couldn't find anybody. Maybe they weren't posting their ads where people could see them or something. I don't know. It just doesn't sound right. I mean, $30 an hour. There's people would, you know.
Well, you have to get up at 3 o'clock in the morning.
You know, there's a lot of people who are getting up at 3 o'clock in the morning to go to work at fast food joints where they're being paid $9 an hour. You know.
Right. Well, I left for 25 years. I left the house at 4:30 in the morning, and I got home at 7, 8 o'clock at night.
Yeah, I get up at 4 o'clock in the morning to do this show. It's like, you know. So.
Well, I hear you, but I think people that disparage undocumented workers. Are you willing to go out there, like farm workers for $50 a day and work in the hot sun, hoeing out, the onion patch?
Right.
For $50 a day, they won't do it.
Right. But for $50, you'll recall John McCain, when he got in the middle of this was maybe 5 years ago or so, he said, we can't get anybody to come to Arizona and pick lettuce. I mean, even if we paid $50 an hour, we couldn't get anybody to do it. It's hard work in the hot sun. And immediately he got over 10,000 contacts from, American citizens saying, $50 an hour, I'll pick lettuce in the hot sun for $50 an hour. Show me where. Now, obviously, that's an exaggeration, but I think that there's no shortage of people who would pick lettuce in the hot sun for $20 an hour. But, the fact of the matter is they want to pay $9 an hour or $8 an hour. And so, which is big money in Mexico. It's not big money here. So what we've done is we've created an economic landscape that lends toward this sort of thing. And that's not good for us. It's not good for American workers. And frankly, it's not good for the immigrants either.
Right. I'd heard something along that line that, 100 people apply, 50 people work, make it through the first day, and 25 come back for the second day.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's true or not.
You're talking about farm labor. Yeah. Now, farm labor is tough stuff. I mean, when I was 16, I up in White Cloud, Michigan, spent a couple of weeks working as an apple picker with a whole bunch of. Now, this was when there was no migrant labor. The summer I was 16 would have been 1965, and so it was me and a whole bunch of basically kind of low-income local people from White Cloud, Nowego, those small towns in northern central Michigan. And, I was up there on a ladder picking apples, and we were paid 50 cents a lug, as I recall. And it was hard work. I could do it for about 2 weeks, and then I was just like, I can't do this anymore.
Yeah. Right. Well, I'm 69. I turned 69 here in a couple of months. And I fortunately went off to college, and so I got to work in the air-conditioned office as a manager. But drywallers, for instance, when they're in their mid-50s, they're done. Physically, they're done, and there's nobody out there to replace them.
Yeah.
The Americans will not hump
and it's
drywall.
because we've screwed up the economy by allowing employers. I mean, it used to be. One of my brothers was a roofer and an electrician and all that sort of thing, and has physically paid the price for that now.
Yes.
But you know, when he started out, these were good union jobs that paid well. You could raise a family. And as that industry, after '86, when Reagan said we're no longer going to enforce these laws, the construction industry and the meatpacking industry were the two industries that were almost entirely unionized. Really good wages, entirely American employees. And both those industries said, hey, screw this. We'll get rid of the unions, we'll get rid of the American workers, and we'll start hiring people who are willing to come here illegally. And that drove down the base wage in those industries. So now, as these people are leaving, you're going to have a hard time finding Americans who will work for that wages, which means that those industries are going to have to start paying decent wages again, which is actually probably the good news out of this, Mike.
Right. Well, here several years ago, we had to lay off one of our best guys, you know, because he was illegal. I think there were a bunch of them that were using the same Social Security number. We laid him off in the morning, and what I found out was he was on somebody else's scaffold that afternoon. So we do have an illegal employer problem.
Yeah, we do, and it is the genesis of all of this, and you can take it all back to Reagan's 1986 amnesty and how he changed enforcement of federal immigration laws after that. And it was all to benefit the billionaires and the big corporations, particularly the big food processing corporations and construction corporations, who had supported Reagan financially to get elected and to get reelected. And that's why he did it. And you know, we're still living with the consequences of that. And it's not, like I said, it's not good for anybody except the Republican Party and Fox so-called news and right-wing hate radio that are using it to exploit the racism that's inherent in some white people, tragically. Mike, thank you for the call.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Perhaps even a majority of white people. I don't know. It's where this is all coming from. But anyhow, we'll be right back. And welcome back. Carrie in Tarrytown, New York. Hey, Carrie, thanks for watching Free Speech TV. What's on your mind today?
Hi, how are you?
I'm well. Hope you are too.
All right. Happy International Women's Day is over.
So happy day after?
Yes, happy day after. Much better. Yeah, so it's Women's History Month, and I thought I would share another quote and a positive idea to keep the Me Too movement going, but more towards a solution goal.
Okay.
Okay, so I guess like yesterday I was asking you to start with a quote or a request, and you said quote first?
Yeah.
So, okay, I was looking for this other quote, and I think it was from the same woman saying that most serial seducers, that's my phrase, but this is all new to me, by the way, but most serial seducers are repeat offenders kind of thing. And so her quote, this is another quote from Robin Morgan, who has her own radio show on women's issues, and it says, evidence shows that perpetrators respond best to confrontation and to corrective loss. So I'm not sure what the last part means, but I'm guessing if a man like loses something that he values in his life, then that hits home.
Or
to him.
loses the possibility of a relationship.
Yeah. So,
I don't know.
Anyway, this is all, like I said, new to me. I don't know how to touch with a 10-foot pole any of, like, the past stuff with my, like, pervert friends. Like, I don't know. But from moving forward, I thought instead of, you know how the Me Too movement is like, this happened to me, and it's all, like, complain. I thought instead, if women could try, I mean, nothing serious has ever happened to me that I know of. I mean, maybe when I'm 74 under hypnosis or something, I'll realize something horrific happened to me. But I'm able to get over kind of like the things that have happened to me ever since I was like a wee one, just the different weird pervert things. But so I thought in general, if women could also, you know, if they have that in them to kind of get over it, they could just from here on out, if and or when a man is inappropriate with you from now on, call it out when it happens.
Yep.
That's it. Call it out when it happens. And there's so much that, like, women kind of need to teach each other. There's so much that I'm learning now that I'm paying attention. I could go on and on, but there's a couple of things that I've experienced so far with the backlash of that, and I thought I would, if it's okay, share a couple of tips in case for women to be prepared for men to say certain things when they do speak up.
Okay.
Okay. So one is basically, gee, honey, are you on your period or something? Relax. So I thought that if any women want to say something like, you know what, you can talk to me about women's issues, but actually maybe not anymore. How about you talk to other men about women's issues? And, like, we'll just put that on pause.
I would just
now.
say
you can
any
talk
man.
to me about all kinds of other stuff.
I would just say that any
women's
man who
issues.
says something like that to a woman, the woman should say, I have no interest in continuing this relationship. I mean, that is so beyond the pale. I mean,
I had a friend.
Yeah, and I also, I get what you're saying about the Me Too movement. I do think, though, that for some women, telling their stories is cathartic, and that's probably therapeutic and helpful. Carrie, we're out of time, but thank you for the call. We'll be back. It's coming up on 20 minutes past the hour. Friday on your media support group for We the People, the Thom Hartmann Program. John in Jefferson, Ohio. Hey, John, what's up?
I'm great, Tom. I'm great. Listen, I've got a little political jiu-jitsu here that we could play on the Republican Party.
Okay.
And this kind of dovetails into that conversation you had with the gentleman from California. He sees all these millions and millions of illegals out there voting.
Right.
Why doesn't the Democratic Party join in a bipartisanship, spirit with the Republican Party and say, we agree. We see all these illegal people voting, so we're going to call for a national political law with a national paper ballot for everybody that can be tracked, so we know who's voting and who's not voting, and it would be backed up by if they don't have a paper ballot that that we can count and verify, then they don't get federal funds.
Yeah.
And that way we can find these people and we can prosecute them and send them out of the country, and they would satisfy their needs, and then they'd have to argue. Because there are none out there. You and I both know that there's nobody going to vote that's illegal.
Since 2000, there have been 38 people.
Away.
Since 2000,
right.
They have found 38 people who have voted illegally, and about half of them voted for Republicans. And they weren't even all Mexicans. Several of them were from Europe.
Right. And that would get us to a paper ballot, which would be a better voting system for every American anyway.
Yeah, I'm wary of Democrats buying into Republican lies, essentially, that are being used for partisan purposes. I mean, the only reason that Republicans are talking about illegal immigrants voting, or undocumented people here in this country voting, the only reason is to justify their efforts to push people off the voting rolls who have Hispanic last names. Or common last names, which should be Hispanics, African Americans, and Asians, and I think to give any validity to that whatsoever is dangerous and toxic. But I get where you're coming from, John. And
what if it was placed in a different context, that we could just say, okay, in order to prove what you're saying, why don't we go to paper ballots? And then that way put the burden of proof on them.
Yeah.
You know,
I'm surprised they're not using the Russians. You know, I'm surprised the Democrats are not saying, "Hey, if the Russians have hacked into a bunch of states' election systems, obviously anybody else can do it. We need to secure these systems. We need to unprivatize them. We need to take them away from these private for-profit companies and have the states run the elections like they used to."
Good point. I agree.
So yeah,
I agree.
Yeah, and if the Russians can hack it, so can the Chinese, and so can the guy sitting on his bed that Trump talked about. John, I got to move along, but thank you for the call. Maine in Chicago. Hey, Maine, what's up?
Yeah, how you doing?
Good.
Tom, I wanted to talk about the Chicago politics here. I mean, here in Chicago and Illinois and the Midwest area, period. We have Ron Emanuel. I feel, or not so much Ron Emanuel. Let me just say, the political atmosphere or the political might or power in this city is so strong that I feel is so strong that at certain times of the day, they will certain talk show hosts will not allow them to take phone calls from the people. Now you talk about, we the people. I say we the people democratize capitalism, and so this is what's happening here in Chicago. At certain times of the day, they will not allow the people to speak. And with the politics going with Ron Emanuel and with the governor.
Maine, there are just, some shows are not call-in shows. You might be, if somebody's got a...
No, this show did call in. It was called in the beginning. As a matter of fact, this show has had about 4 or 5 different talk show hosts. It's a very volatile time,
Yeah. Well, I can't, Maine, I can't speak to it. I don't listen to the stations in Chicago. I'm sorry.
Right. I know that. Well,
but the bottom line is you're concerned about Chicago politics, right? And you're concerned
concerned
about
the
machine.
voice of the people.
Yeah.
The people not having a voice.
Well, there's a solution for that, Maine.
At a critical time. Yeah.
There's a solution for that, and that is for you and everybody you know to show up at your local Democratic Party and become the Democratic Party. If you're not happy with the direction that the Democratic Party is going in Chicago or in Illinois, then become it. Take it over. It's wide open. They're begging for volunteers. They're looking for people to come into the party. And the more that we can do that, the more we're going to see politics, frankly, cleaned up in the United States. Man, I got to move along here, but thank you for the call. Let's see, Jim in Los Angeles. Hey, Jim, got just a minute to go. Quick one?
No, Professor. Anyhow, geez, I wanted to address your caller, Patrick. He sounds like a good guy and a Republican, but there's a fact that not all Democrats are good and not all Republicans are bad, but all Republican politicians and pundits are evil. Greed is evil, and politicians believe in burning humans alive for profit, and there are solutions. But the radical redneck right-wing Republican, full of sham, insanity, and Fox Nixon News Network, he knows that you can get 2 to 14 years in jail for voting illegally.
Yeah, they know what they're doing, these guys. There's no secrets here. Jim, thanks for the call. We'll be back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
On the Stormy Daniels affair, it looks like Michael Cohen was using a Trump campaign email to negotiate the deal that he wasn't doing on behalf of Trump. Really?
It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from the Thom Hartmann Reader. This particular chapter is an excerpt from my book Threshold, by the way. But this is from page 312 of the collected, kind of my collected writings, as it were. It's titled Sociopathic Paychecks. And it starts out with a quote from Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, The Little Prince, 1943. I know a planet where there is a certain red-faced gentleman. He has never smelled a flower. He has never looked at a star. And all day he says over and over, just like you,
I am busy with matters of consequence. And that makes him swell up with pride. But he is not a man, he is a mushroom. Okay, to the book. Americans have long understood how socially, politically, and economically destabilizing are huge disparities in wealth. For this reason, the U.S. military and the U.S. civil service have built into them systems that ensure that the highest paid federal official, including the president, will never earn more than 20 times the salary of the lowest paid janitor or Army private. Most colleges have similar programs in place, with the ratios ranging from 10 to 1 to 20 to 1 between the president of the university and the guy who mows the grass. From the 1940s through the 1980s, this was also a general rule of thumb in most of corporate America. When CEOs took more than their fair share, they were restrained by their boards so that the money could be used instead by the company for growth and to open new areas of opportunity. The robber baron J.P. Morgan himself suggested that nobody in a company, including his company, should earn more than 20 times the lowest paid employee. Although he exempted stock ownership from that equation, he owned most of the stock. During the greed is good era of the 1980s, something changed. CEO salaries began to explode at the same time that the behavior of multinational corporations began to change. When Reagan stopped enforcing the Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890, a mergers and acquisition mania filled the air. And as big companies merged to become bigger, they shed off redundant parts. The result was a series of waves of layoffs as entire communities were decimated, divorce and suicide rates exploded, and America was introduced to the specter of the armed, disgruntled employee. Accompanying the consolidation of wealth and power of these corporations was the very real redefinition of employment, from providing a living wage to people in the community to a variable expense on a profit and loss sheet. Companies that manufactured everything from clothing to television sets discovered that there was a world full of people willing to work for 50 cents an hour or less. Throughout America, factories closed and a building boom commenced among the Asian tigers of Taiwan, South Korea, and Thailand. The process has become so complete that of the millions of American flags bought and waved after the World Trade Center disaster, 9/11, most were manufactured in China. Very, very, very few things are still manufactured in the United States outside of the defense industry, weapons. And it wasn't unthinking, unfeeling corporations that took advantage of the changes in the ways the Sherman Antitrust Act and other laws were enforced by Reagan, Bush Sr., Clinton, and Bush Jr. administrations. It took a special type of human person. In his manuscript, Toys, War, and Faith, Democracy in Jeopardy, Major William C. Gladish suggests that this special breed of person is actually a rare commodity and thus highly valuable. He notes that corporate executives make so much money because of simple supply and demand. There are, of course, many people out there with the best education from the best school, raised in upper-class families who know how to play the games of status, corporate intrigue, and power. The labor pool would seem to be quite large, but Gladish points out there's another and more demanding requirement to meet. They must be willing to operate in a runaway economic and financial system that demands the exploitation of humanity and the environment for short-term gain. This is a disturbing contradiction to their children's interest and their own intelligence, education, cultural appreciation, and religious beliefs. It's the second requirement, Gladish notes, that drastically reduces the number of quality candidates for corporations to pick from. Most people in this group are not willing to forsake God, family, and humanity to further corporate interests in a predatory financial system. For the small percentage of people left, the system continues to increase salaries and benefit packages to entice the most qualified and ruthless to detach themselves from humanity and become corporate executives and their hired guns. One of the questions often asked when the subject of CEO pay comes up is, what would a person like William McGuire or Rex Tillerson, the CEOs of United Healthcare and ExxonMobil, respectively, possibly do to justify a $1.7 billion paycheck or a $400 million retirement bonus? It's an interesting question. If there's a free market for labor or CEOs, you'd think there'd be a lot of competition for the jobs. And a lot of people competing for the positions would drive down the pay. All that United Healthcare stockholders would have to do to avoid paying more than $1 billion to McGuire is find somebody to do the same CEO job for $500 million. And all they'd have to do to save even more is find somebody to do the job for a mere $100 million. Or maybe even somebody who'd work the necessary 60-hour weeks for only $1 million. So why is executive pay so high? I've examined this question with both my psychotherapist hat on and my amateur economist hat on, and only one rational answer presents itself. CEOs in America make as much money as they do because there really is a shortage of well-trained sociopaths. The book is, well, ultimately it's from Threshold, but it's in the Thom Hartmann. Welcome back to the Thom Hartmann Program, helping you win the water cooler wars. And let's do a geeky science here, if we could. Ta-da-da! Geeky science music. There we go. It's our official geeky science music. This was a new study that was published in Nature's online journal, Scientific Reports. And what it found, here's the kind of science part of it. This is about climate change. What it found was that for every 10 degrees, that's of latitude, every 10 degrees north from the equator you move, spring arrives about 4 days earlier than it did just 10 years ago, just a decade ago. Now, to translate that into, actual stuff you can imagine, what that means is that at the latitude of Los Angeles, New Orleans, or Dallas, spring is arriving 1 day earlier than it did just a decade ago. But at the latitude of Seattle, Chicago, or Washington, D.C., spring is arriving 4 days earlier. And at the latitude of northern Alaska, the Arctic, spring is arriving 16 days earlier. Now, not only is this obviously a massive leading indicator of global warming, and you combine that with all the other evidence we're seeing of global warming, like these wild storms and weather anomalies becoming the new norm, but the other big problem is that birds and insects and some other migrating animals as well, and hibernating animals, have different ways of measuring when spring has arrived. Some of them do it based on how long the days are. And the days are not getting any longer or shorter. The days are, the daylight is starting at the exact same time it was 10 years ago, 10,000 years ago. Other animals measure their, when spring comes by some sort of internal clock that seems to just be rigid. And most animals do it based on temperature. So what is happening is birds are hatching, looking for food for their, they're hatching their eggs, they're looking for food for their babies, or they're arriving in in places that they migrate through, looking for food. But the insects, they haven't got the message yet, right? They don't know that spring was 16 days early. And so there's no food for the birds. And so the birds are dying. Or some kinds of insects eat other kinds of insects. And so we're seeing all these imbalances that are occurring in the ecosystem that are getting worse and worse the farther north you go. And this is really dangerous, destructive stuff, not just in the context of extinctions. Changing ecosystems may end up changing in ways that are hostile to human life or hostile to other kinds of life as well. Plus, of course, this is just more and more solid, irrefutable evidence that every Republican in the House and Senate who are lying to you, and Fox News and right-wing hate radio who are lying to you on behalf of petro-billionaires in this country, the big oil dynasties, the big oil companies, the big coal dynasties, that they're just plain old flat out wrong. And they know that they're wrong. They know that they're lying to you. But they continue to do it anyway. They're probably very well paid for it. Marty in Evergreen Park, Illinois. Hey, Marty, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom. Hey, thank you for taking my call.
Sure.
I just wanted to share, because you were talking about teachers earlier, and I read a really powerful letter that one teacher put up. And if you DuckDuckGo, quote, "Dear every elected official," unquote, and then her name, Rebecca Berlin Field. She wrote this really, really beautiful rant, and I thought I would share some of it with you. But basically, it starts out, "Dear every elected official, nowhere in my contract does it state that if the need arises, I have to shield students from gunfire with my own body. If it did, I wouldn't have signed it." And then, further on, it says, "At the end of my teaching contract, it said that I will perform, quote, other duties to be assigned. I do not interpret these as bleeding to death on the floor of my classroom."
Right.
And
yeah, I read that.
sometimes
It's been going all over the internet. I think it was posted on DU yesterday.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a really remarkable, really well thought out letter. And she was on another radio program, the author of that letter, and read it aloud. And it was really powerful. But we have no business asking these teachers who have their own responsibilities to play Rambo in these situations where all they want to do is protect themselves and protect the children. We shouldn't ask that of them, and I think that it's wrong and irresponsible to demand teachers.
I absolutely agree, and it's all being done to maintain the profits of the weapons industry. I mean, it's just that simple. That's it. Period.
Yeah, they're just looking to sell more guns.
Yeah.
That's all. They just want to propagate these things wherever they can.
20% of all teachers should have guns. Hey, you know, we just made another $1 billion. It is wrong. It's criminal, and it is a symptom of what Jimmy Carter pointed out on this program. That now that industries like the weapons industries, through their lobbying group, their front group, the NRA, now that they can buy politicians nakedly, they can openly own politicians. We no longer have a democracy. We have an oligarchy. The vast majority of Americans want reasonable gun control, and we're not getting it because the vast majority of Americans do not own politicians. The billionaires own politicians. The NRA owns politicians. The weapons manufacturers own politicians. So spot on, Marty. Well said. David in Woodland Hills, California. Hey, David, thanks for listening to SiriusXM. What's on your mind today?
And thank you, Guru. I want to tell you a story about how I channeled my inner Thom Hartmann to battle a racist.
Okay.
I'm a member of a Facebook group with liberals and conservatives, and there's this one guy, every time he rants about Obama, he calls him a T-U-R-D.
Right.
Over and over and over again. And this is a guy who touts his superior positions. So finally I wrote, that sounds racist to me. And he replied, it's not racist. It's a genetic insult you can use for anyone. Why do liberals always see racism everywhere? I replied, if it's not racist, how come you never call Hillary or Bill that word? And he replied, I have specific insults for them. Hillary is a blank, blank, blank C word. Bill's a blank, blank, over-the-hill, washed-up politicians. Again, why do liberals see racism everywhere? I replied, even if given the benefit of the doubt, which I doubt he deserves, but, and this is where I channeled my inner Thom Hartmann, ad hominem attacks are the refuge of the uninformed. His response was nothing.
Yeah.
But then, one day later, he was back, worse than before. So these people are nuts, like that letter you read earlier in the week, that terrifying letter. These people are nuts, and earlier this week, I heard Mark Levin on his show say about Mueller's investigation, we're not going to stand for this. He has, 10 million people, many of them armed to the teeth, and he said, we're not going to stand for this.
Yeah, it's the violent segregation of America, the dividing of America, and I don't mean racially, I'm talking about the process of dividing Americans from each other based on demographics, based on ideology, based on race, based on everything. It's become a science now. It's what Cambridge Analytica does so well. It's how Mercer helped Trump get elected. It's or game the Electoral College anyway, and it's destructive. When John Stewart said to Tucker Carlson back in the day that Crossfire, the show on CNN, because they were dealing with politics in this kind of petty, rapid-fire, dueling bumper sticker mode, he said, "You're hurting America." Man, that was nothing. Compared to what's going on now. And this is hurting America. David, good job. Good job. And keep us informed as you continue on your adventures. Jerry in Aurora, Colorado. Hey, Jerry, what's up?
Yeah, anyway, thanks for having me on.
Sure.
Yeah, what I was going to do is I look at the single payer health and free public transportation where they kind of go hand in hand, because what I've noticed in my life, I've seen people that if they exercise and lose weight, their type 2 diabetes goes away or is much more managed.
Yes.
And it's just when you're on public transportation, you're like multitasking, all that good stuff.
Well, here's one of the things I noticed when Louise and I were in Denmark. this was 4 or 5 years ago. We did our show for a week from the studios of Danish Radio. They were kind enough to loan us a studio. And we interviewed a lot of Danish politicians, particularly the conservative politicians, because I love, discussing and debating with conservatives. But in any case, one of the things they had just undergone, and by just, I mean probably within the last decade, a major restructuring of, it's Copenhagen, it's the capital of Denmark, isn't it? I'm pretty sure. I mix up my Northern European countries, but that's where we were. And they had just done this major restructuring of the road system, and they turned a lot of streets into one-ways. And the reason that they had done this is they turned every street, they basically cut every street in half, and half of it was for bicycles and the other half was for cars. So they radically reduced the amount of car traffic that was available in the city and radically increased the number of safe, I mean really safe bicycle lanes. And everybody was bicycling, and we were there in the, I don't know, it was a late fall or early winter. It was cold. I mean, we really had to bundle up and go out. And I don't think there was snow on the ground, as I recall, but it was cold and it was rainy. It was gray time there. And I was talking with one of the politicians about this and said, why'd you do this? It seems like a good thing. And he says, well, we have this commitment to climate change. And he said, but more importantly, he said, everybody in this country pays for the health care of everybody else. And the more people that we can encourage to ride their bicycle to work, or to the shopping center, or to over to their friend's house, the healthier we all get, and the less it costs us in taxes to pay for our own health care. And it was like, when you have a country where you have single-payer health care, that spills over into all other kinds of different policy areas, as you correctly point out, Jerry, like public transportation. I mean, this is kind of a variation on that, that are good for society and good for all of us. We really need to get to Medicare for all as soon as we can. Jerry, thanks for the call. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
More of your calls on Anything Goes Friday here on the Thom Hartmann Program in just a moment. And welcome back. Jeff in Portland, Oregon, listening on X-Ray FM. Hey, Jeff, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, thanks for taking my call at the home of the political revolution, as you call it. And yeah, give yourself full credit for incubating Bernie's campaign and bringing the insurgency to the mainstream.
Thank you.
The reason I'm calling today is now that the 2018 primary season is underway, I just want to impress upon everyone listening the importance of getting out the vote for progressives right now, not waiting till November. By getting out the vote now, this is how we move the ball the direction we want to go. And the better we'll do, because the better we do in the primaries, the more leverage we gain in the national conversation.
Yep.
And frankly, the better the Democrats will do in November.
Yep.
And dissecting this a bit more, if we look back at 2016, Tom, putting aside the red shift, which you talk about a lot from the unverifiable electronic voting, and the fact that Hillary went AWOL in her campaigning in the Rust Belt, I'll give her credit that she did adopt and co-opt many of Bernie's proposals.
And she got 3 million more votes than Trump did. I mean, let's not forget that.
Right. She did adopt many of Bernie's proposals, and you pointed out recently that the vast majority of these proposals are favored by an overwhelming amount of Americans. But the big issue, in my opinion, that helped Orange Chump win the Rust Belt was his stance against the TPP, and that was an issue, the one issue where people were probably most skeptical about Hillary's commitment to. And in my opinion, she only reinforced that skepticism when she selected Tim Kaine as opposed to choosing, say, Sherrod Brown, Elizabeth Warren, or of course Bernie himself.
Agreed.
And as you know, Tom, Tim Kaine is now one of the dozen Democrats signed on to this current Senate bill to further deregulate the banks.
Yep.
So we need look no further than these dozen sellout Democrats in the Senate to motivate us to get out the vote in these primaries. Don't you agree?
I do. I absolutely do. And it's not. it's not just voter turnout that we have to make happen. We also have to get people inside the parties, progressives inside the parties, who can run for precinct committee person or take those positions in those places where they're literally unfilled, and there's probably thousands of them across the country. And because they get to write the platform, and they get to decide who is going to qualify to run in the primaries. So we get a more progressive platform, we get more progressive candidates, we get a more progressive country. I wrote an op-ed that's up on Alternet right now. It's not on the homepage. You have to click on economy and go to the economy homepage, and it's the third story there, about how Trump is right about trade, how Democrats have been saying this, progressive Democrats have been saying this about trade forever. And it's only with the advent of Bill Clinton in '92 that corporate Democrats walked away from fair trade and embraced neoliberalism and so-called free trade. And that Democrats, if they want to win elections, should steal this issue from Trump. They should take it right out of his teeth. They should say, "Nice job, Donald, with the steel and aluminum tariffs. What are you going to do for the toy industry? What are you going to do for the car industry? What are you going to do for the computer industry? What are you going to do for the television industry? What are you going to do for the companies, for the industries where we literally don't even make them in America anymore? Washing machines, vacuum cleaners, refrigerators. I mean, and on it goes. So yeah, there's a lot that we can do, and very well said, Jeff. Thanks a lot for the call, and thanks for listening to X-Ray FM. We'll be right back. Welcome back. It's Anything Goes Friday here. Mike in Chicago. Hey, Mike, what's up?
Yeah, hi. Being that it's Anything Goes Friday, I just was wondering if, with the recent news and information that's come in about Trump, such as trademarking the Make America Great Again, and
that was in 2012, by the way.
Right, and extending and the effort that he seemed to put in basically finding ways to defeat Hillary. Do you still think he was running for president to better negotiate his apprentice contract?
I do.
And also, do you think that before I get to that, and do you still think he didn't want to win?
I still think he did not expect to win. I think I think that his ego wanted him to win, but the fact that they were utterly unprepared when they did win. I mean, he didn't even have an acceptance speech. They were utterly unprepared during that period of time, from that period of time until the transition. They pulled together this ad hoc group of whack jobs headed up by Mike Pence, a former talk show host, which I suppose I shouldn't be putting down talk show hosts given what I do, but really.
Talk show hosts.
It's just so obvious that they did not expect to govern, and that they never even seriously considered how to govern, and that Trump was trying to leverage this. I think the whole Trump-Russia thing early on, the early contacts that they were having with the Russians before he had won the primary, I think that stuff was Trump trying to use his newfound fame from having run for president. He said, "I'll be the first guy to run for president, make a profit on it." He was trying to use that newfound fame to leverage his Trump Hotel Moscow, which is something that he had been trying to get ever since 2013 when he did the Miss America pageant in Moscow. And I think that it's, at the end of the day, we're going to find out it's all about money, and it's all about the Trump crime family, and the Kushner crime family, for that matter, trying to just cover their butts and make a profit. And now we've got grifters in the White House as a result of it. That's my opinion. So
I don't disagree with that aspect. It just seems to have the foresight 2 years in advance to make plans to negotiate for the apprentice.
No, I don't think he was. I think he had been playing with the idea of running for president since the 2000 aughts. I mean, since the George W. Bush administration, when he started criticizing Bush.
I don't doubt that.
I think he always saw that as a Hail Mary pass if he got in trouble financially. And his son-in-law had bought this, god-awful building, 666 Fifth Avenue, that he had paid, $500 million more for than it was worth, and he's got loan payments coming up. Donald Trump himself had just had this horrible bankruptcy You know, if we're going back to the 2012, he had the last of a series of horrible bankruptcies. The only way he could get out was by getting money via Russian oligarchs and Deutsche Bank. No U.S. bank would lend him money. He needed a Hail Mary, and I think that he was thinking in 2010, 11, 12, 13, 14, you know, running for president would be a great Hail Mary. To get my name out there. Every time he'd gotten his name in the press, good, bad, or otherwise, it had helped him. And he was just trying to do it. But we'll never know, Mike. I mean, or maybe we will. I don't know. But, you know, all we can do is speculate on it. Mike, I need to move along, but thank you for the call. Michael in Antelope, California. Hey, Michael, what's on your mind today?
Hold on, let me take you off the speaker.
Okay, you're not, you know, we're not going to do that anymore. Caleb in Lake Oswego, Oregon. Hey, Caleb, what's on your mind today?
You know, in addition to Stormy Daniels, I am following the Chris Kobach debacle in Kansas. You know, the hearing before Judge Robinson. She's just reading him the riot act about his lack of preparation, also the no proof of the thing. Just a wonderful thing. Number two, Tom, I've subscribed to your podcast for 6 years. I love it. 3-hour podcast. I can take it with me in the car. Today I used it exercising. I mean, doing housework. It makes it.
Thank you,
if everyone listened to you, Tom, the Republicans would have lost so long ago. So I sure hope that they listen.
Thank you. We put a lot of work into those things. So the main thrust of your call was to call out Chris Kobach and point out.
Oh my God, it's so much fun. I mean, he's such a lying, you know.
Well, here's the problem, Caleb. I don't think he cares if he wins or loses this case. I think what he's trying to do is set up a pitch to the Supreme Court, and if they can get it to the Supreme Court, you know, Gorsuch, Neil Gorsuch, and of course John Roberts. You know, he's the Chief Justice, but Gorsuch and these Republican political appointees, and particularly if Kennedy resigns, and there was some sign that he might, although he's apparently already hired clerks for the next term, so maybe he's not planning on retiring.
But Tom, there are only like about 10 or 8 people that apparently might have voted illegally. I mean, it's so limited as to the, 18,000 people who voted legally. I mean, the numbers are just, and also Kobach, wanted to bring in stuff at the last second. Robinson said, hey, you had 2 years to bring it to it. And you're going to bring it in the last second, that's sandbagging. But it's the facts of the case are so against Kobach.
Yeah.
I'm sure you're right.
I'm looking for, I know that Greg Palast has been following this thing very, very carefully also. And I'm looking forward to hearing from him. Thanks for the call, Caleb, and thanks for your kind words. Leslie in Seattle, listening on KEOW. Leslie, you've got the last minute. What's up?
Okay, I'll make it snappy. I was at FedEx the other day, and which obviously maybe I can't go there anymore because of the NRA connection. But I had an epiphany, Tom. There was a guy in there with this great big dog that kind of looked like a mastiff, but it was a French thing, and it struck me. I have a teaching certificate, so I understand the difficulties of putting dogs in classrooms. Mm-hmm. But we had a news story here about a German Shepherd that staved off a home invasion who was actually shot and saved the family.
Right.
So I don't know. I just wanted to get the idea out there, and teach kids how to take care of something too. So kill 2 birds with 1 stone.
That's not a terrible idea, Leslie. We still do need gun control. But rather than arming teachers, instead of arming teachers, putting some canine dogs into the schools, I frankly I don't know enough about it. I'm reading a book right now by Robert Crace called Promise, which is one of the characters in the book. One of the viewpoint characters in the book is a German Shepherd. He's a canine police dog. And it's fascinating. It's just fascinating. Leslie, thanks so much for the call. Thank you all for being with us. I'm going to hop on a plane and head to Minneapolis this weekend. If you're a KTNF listener, I look forward to seeing you at the Blue State Ball tomorrow night. And in the meantime, don't forget, I'll be back here on Monday. Hopefully you will too. Get out there, get active, tag You're It. We'll see you on Monday.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
The Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242.
Or visit tomsbeets.com.